that Clark Judge, Ira Kaufman, and other selectors will say, not me, because I don't like to say, oh, everyone hates our Broncos. They don't. Okay. But here's the thing, Orange Crush defense is not in the Hall of Fame. No one from there is on there. And if you look at the 70s defenses, elite defenses, there are 5 elite defenses all represented in the Hall of Fame, from Steel Curtain, No Name, and so forth. If you take that further, and most of you have seen this one, but for those watching, you take the first 37 Super Bowls, 74 unique teams, 73 of them have one representative or more in the Hall of Fame. The Broncos from 77, 0. Randy Gradishar, clearly their best player. But I also want to, before I pass the baton to Jack to talk about Ken Anderson, I also want to talk about something that's very important to all of us, humanity. We hear that also for Mongo. We're from Chicago. We hear that also with Maxie Bond. May he rest in peace. So sad to see that happen yesterday before he could be inducted or selected. Here's some stats for y'all. Of the 9 living semifinalists who were selected, including Maxie at the time, 4 of them are within 5 years of age 77 as of next year's induction. Why does that matter? That's the life expectancy for an adult male in the US. So this is late in their lives, and they didn't just play a physical career. It was violent. If you saw like Randy Gradishar highlights ad nauseum on my feed, you'd see the guy coming from nowhere and blindsiding a ball carrier to stop a 4th and 1. That takes a toll. Now, if you look over my shoulder here, you see some pictures of Randy, arm in a sling. Gentleman had his arm in a sling for almost a year because of shoulder replacement surgery. He's still recuperating. And I'm sure that cascades to Maxie Bond. I'm sure that also, Eddie Meter and Ken Anderson, thanks to Jack Lambert, he wasn't allowed to wear a skirt, and who will be 75 next year at ceremonies. So just keep in mind that humanity. These are not game pieces. These are not like numbers, stats, metrics. These are real people who are alive and contributed to the game. And also major respect to the posthumous folks and those who are a little bit younger, and certainly Mr. McMichael and his family. But I just wanted to point that out. And one final thing before I pass the baton, Vinny, Paul, and I were at the Canton ceremonies. It was heart-wrenching to see Scott Hawley have to go up on stage and give the speech for his dad, or unveil the bust. I mean, it just shouldn't be that way. They should be able to enjoy this experience with their families. Big kudos to you, Paul, for all that you did for Chuck Hawley. I wish the Cowboys and his family knew. And please let us know why Ken Anderson was our selection, along with Randy Gradishar and Chuck Hawley last year. And by the way, Ken will be 75 next year on induction day. Something to keep in mind. Thank you very much, and let's hope for good news on Wednesday.
I hope so too. Seriously. In the same way that I partially wanted Howley for Paul, I will admit I understand it's more than just you, but I would be lying if I said I didn't want to see Randy make it for you, Ron. Seriously.
It's way bigger than that for all of these seniors and their families, and just being able to enjoy it. You saw the joy in Canton with all of those folks who did get to celebrate with their families. And those, like the Riley family on stage without Ken, just was heart-wrenching too. And there's a lot of people. It takes a village for all of these folks to make sure that the awareness. I haven't done much for Randy other than making people aware of what he's done. Same thing with Paul for Chuck Hawley. And that's all we can do, to be fair, because it's a Hall of Fame, Hall of Great, as John McClane always says. It's not the Hall of Good or very good. It's got to be the Hall of Great. I would never promote someone who is like, but my favorite player. And thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much. Paul, so you're going to tell us a little bit about why we went with Ken Anderson last year.
Yeah, just to refresh everyone's memory and those who are joining us or watching this tonight. So we went through our process last year, and Ken Anderson was one that we had selected. Just again, since we kind of went over the case, I don't need to go in detail. We're not going to really debate it as much as just kind of hit some highlights for you. So in Ken Anderson, we have a player who in the 70s into the early 80s, right, was a top tier quarterback. You can see that in terms of twice he led the league in passing yards, 4 times he led the league in passing rating, 3 times in completion percentage. He has an MVP, 1981, also Offensive Player of the Year in that same season. First team All-Pro in 81, second team in 1975. He sort of has 2 pillars, if people are familiar with his career. And again, we won't get into the pros and cons of the case. We've already put him in. So some success there in the mid late 70s, a little bit of a lull towards the end, and then a resurgence there in the early 80s. So that's why you see these kind of spread in some of his stats between some that occurred in 75 and 76, and then a few years later again in 81 and 82. Was able to get the Bengals in the playoffs a number of times in the 70s, and then again in the early 80s, ran up against some really great teams of that era, like the Raiders and the Steelers in the AFC. And of course, we already mentioned about his 1981 season where he got the Bengals into the playoffs and actually to the AFC Championship in a game maybe Kurt and I will cover in our series one of these days, because it was the Freezer Bowl, I think, or the Freezer game they call it, the infamous game against the Chargers that they went on. And then, of course, went on to play the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 16. We saw the rise of that dynasty with Walsh and Montana and that group. A game that was close, at least for the part of the game, but they just ran into a juggernaut that, as we say, has become a dynasty. Probably one of the other quick points to make go Ken Anderson, where he sits with his peers, probably the most comparable existing Pro Football Hall of Famer he's often compared to is Dan Fouts. Now, Dan Fouts' stats are a little bit different in terms of yardage and total touchdowns in a career, but they parallel their careers in many, many ways. And often that's used as a comparison of a guy who's in. Fouts retired near the top of all the major passing career stats, but Anderson retired top 7 and top 5 in a couple of those stats as well. So his career was not that far off from an existing Hall of Famer. I'm not saying they're exactly the same player. I'm not saying the resume is exactly the same. But often this exercise, I look at where is a comparable Hall of Famer, right, in that era from that position when you're looking at a candidate, and Anderson certainly was one of those. And finally, as we're all aware, and we're not going to belabor this point, the Bengals don't have a lot of Pro Football Hall of Famers, of course. Again, that's just one tick in terms of the box to consider in a case like this. So I think when you put that together, I think this group did a fantastic job. And although he's not currently in the actual Hall of Fame, I suspect in the coming years he will be a strong candidate for that eventual election. But we were way ahead of the voters. We've already put him in. There you go, Kurt.
All right, thank you so much. So we're going to do this reverse alphabetically. I think we might have had some audio problems before, so I'm just going to reiterate a couple things that anyone watching may not have heard. As Paul and Ron have stated, we've already elected Randy Gratishard, Ken Anderson to ours. So again, the official list of those who are finalists is Ken Anderson, Maxie Vaughn, Randy Gratishard, Joe Jacoby, Albert Lewis, Steve Mongo McMichael, Eddie Metter, Art Powell, Sterling Sharp, Otis Taylor, Al Wistert. A vote went out to this group and a few other people who were not able to join us, and we came up with a different group. We actually have 13 due to a tie. 5 overlap. The 5 that overlap are Bond, Roger Craig, Albert Lewis, Sterling Sharp, and Al Wistert. The ones that do not, we're far old school: Labby Dilweg, Ox Emerson, LC Greenwood, thank you, Lester Hayes, Bob Kuchenberg, Del Schaffner, and Lewis Wright. We're going to go in reverse alphabetical order because I want to keep everything at least 4 minutes, and I'm going to ask some people as we go who might open up different things. In this case, what I would like to do is have Tom open up for Lewis Wright. We're going to talk about him for the next 4 minutes or so. Take it away, Tom.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Louis Wright has the hardware to get into the Hall of Fame, right? He's got 2 first-team All-Pros, 5 Pro Bowls, which is the same in number as Mel Blount, who's in the Hall of Fame, Ty Law, of cornerback in the Hall of Fame, very similar to Darryl Green, and more than Ken Riley, who's just inducted, right? So he has the awards that others have that are in the Hall of Fame. He's also the only corner on the 1970s All-Decade team who's not in the Hall of Fame. So he has accolades, but the knock against him is he just didn't have enough interceptions. Well, the problem with that logic is opposing quarterbacks didn't throw at him, right? Dan Fouts, who we just talked about, Hall of Famer, quoted, said, "We had to shy away from him." And that was not easy because he was on their left side, our right side, and it seems you like to throw more passes to that side of the field. So even though they wanted to throw there, they wouldn't. So he was deterring the offense from throwing at him. So he's harder to get interceptions. But when they had to throw at him, he actually did make them pay. So I'm going to just quickly, show of hands, who's heard of Calvin Jones and Aaron Kyle?
Well, I've heard of them.
A couple people.
But the things I've heard weren't good.
I've heard the names.
So those were the two cornerbacks that he had opposite him for several years during his playing career. And that's when he had averaged less than one interception per season. Now, when you had Mike Harden and Steve Foley opposite him, he averaged over 3 interceptions per season. So if he had somebody on the other side of him for a certain amount of time, he would have had around 40 interceptions. Most likely. I mean, it's math, but I'm adding it up and multiplying it. So that's similar to Mike Haynes and Roger Worley, right? So had he had the opportunity to intercept the ball, he probably would have been ranked much higher. So I'm just going to end this by saying there's two things that I look at when I look at it. Is this person is a Hall of Famer or not? Were they ever considered the best at their position when they played? And did they leave an impact on the game? Well, obviously, if he was voted All-Decade team in the 1970s, he was considered the best at what he did, or one of the best at what he did when he played. And the second thing is he's known as the original shutdown corner. So now that name that you hear all the time given to these great cornerbacks, Louis Wright was that, the epitome of that before it was a term. That was given to him after the fact because he was so good at what he did. That's an impact on the game. That's thinking about something that he was creating before it became something that everybody talks about today. So that's why I believe that he should be in the Hall of Fame, regardless of his statistical inadequacy when it comes to interceptions, because there's reasons for it. Thank you very much.
All right.
If I
Thanks so
could
much.
add in one thing.
Brian, you wanted to say something. You've got a list that you do that you've got Louis Wright as one of your highest rated players.
Yeah, so I have him as my 129th overall player ever, 14th cornerback, 6th cornerback at the time of his retirement. The assignments that he had were incredibly difficult. He played number one receivers with little help over the top, which is an incredibly risky place to be. I know Piers can back me up with all that film we've been watching. And he did drop a lot of interceptions. That's another reason that he doesn't have a lot of interceptions. But whether the ball ended up in his hands or on the ground, it still was a failure for the offense. If most of the time when you threw the ball in his direction. And also something that Tom didn't mention is when it came to playing the run, he's probably top 5 I've ever seen when it comes to just eliminating the sweep. You're not going to run it against him. He's like Aeneas Williams or Herb Adderley or something like that. Like he just eliminates the run to his side of the field. And he takes out the pass, takes out the run. I don't know what else you could ask the guy to do.
If I could chime in with one other thing here with Louis Wright, because I always found this really interesting. We've talked before with examples like Carl Banks of they got one vote, so now they're like second team all-decade 1980s. Louis Wright missed the first team by one vote compared to Jimmy Johnson. And I'm not saying Jimmy Johnson out of Hall of Fame. He certainly belongs. But I have to wonder, like, if Louis Wright got one person that voted for Jimmy Johnson to vote for him instead, he would be first team all-decade and probably would be in years ago because every single player on the 70s all-decade first team is now in Canton versus the second team where you've got guys like L.C. Greenwood, who we'll talk about in a little bit, Harvey Martin and Dick Anderson. And I just want to call it like the low interceptions is one thing that's fair, but to Tom's point, They didn't throw at him a lot, and he literally could shut down half of the field in multiple ways, not just in the passing game, like Brian called out. So certainly
Yeah.
belongs.
Don't
Go
forget,
ahead.
Roger Worley was also second team and had the same number of votes as Lewis Wright, also with 7. And he made it like a decade and a half ago. Roger Worley as a senior.
Yes, that is correct.
It was his last time on the list before he dropped the senior pool.
So he was like a Sam Mills in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can just add too. I mean, a good comparison to him to more present day would be Champ Bailey. Bailey had better hands, obviously, playing offense in college, but like you couldn't run against him, and he was a shutdown guy.
Evan, you always know this. And sorry, not to put you on the spot. You probably have your Excel sheet open. Has he ever been a semifinalist or finalist before? I don't believe so. No.
Give
No.
me 1 second. My Excel just shut down. I think the answer is no, but I'll double check.
I know no.
Never been a
finalist,
finalist. Never been a finalist. I don't know about semi.
Semi-finalists they didn't do until like the 2003, 2004 around there.
They
So
didn't make public.
we never made public, so we have no idea about it. But as for a finalist, no, he never has been.
I'm gonna time check us.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't just that they didn't make it public. They actually never voted down to 25.
Oh,
okay.
Prior to
Gotcha.
2004, they had a list of 100, whatever. They voted right down to 15. There was no, it wasn't that it was made public or not. It didn't even exist as part of the process, which is crazy when you think about it. But
Jesus,
that
that's
down.
difficult. I can't do that.
Paul, that's why
Wright
you have the most. That's why you've got that handle. What's your Twitter handle?
Mine.
No, Paul.
Yeah,
It's Pro Football Paul PF
Yes.
PF 0800F.
Wait to go, Paul Los Panuso.
Paul, I had no idea you were that much of a ventriloquist. That was awesome. I had no idea you could do that.
Vinny and I spent 3 days in Canton practicing that, so we're all good to go.
That's true.
they were inseparable.
They've got their
All right, we might have
checkbook
talked
online.
more about Wright than almost anybody else.
Yeah,
For
so-
that purpose.
Time.
Sorry, I was just saying, Lewis Wright does not show up on my spreadsheet at all. So he's never
At
at
all?
least
Okay.
he's never been semifinals or finals, as far as we know.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on then to Al Wistert, and I'm going to have each of you open differently, and I'm doing this with Vinny because Vinny just did something actually for us. I'm going to do a bit of self promotion, and because Vinny also does a show here on the Bucknerverse. Hold on, when I do the Bucknerverse, where Vinny makes various yes, thank you all, where he makes Hall of Fame cases, and just give us like your 1 minute. 1 minute.
I promise.
On why you picked Al Wistert.
Well, Al Worcester, other than Laverne Dilwig, I think is the most deserving senior post NFL merger, and emphasizing post NFL, not NFL, post NFL creation. No offense to Pudge or Follis or the other guys, but and there's a big reason why. 8-time All Pro, 6 of them first team, including the whole run that he had. Also, 2 NFL championships where he played a huge part in Steve Van Buren being the legendary player that he became because he opened so many lanes up, especially in the 1948 championship. But the biggest thing for me for Al Worcester is simple. John Turney, who we have our, feelings on one way or another, but either way, he compiled all the 6 major all-decade teams in the 1940s and found that there were 5 players that were part of all 6 of the first team all decades for the 1940s. These were Sammy Baugh, of course, the first ever person put in the Hall of Fame, Steve Van Buren, Marion Motley, Bulldog Turner, and all those 4 guys made it in like their earliest years. But as for the 5th guy, Al Wistert. Al Wistert was the 5th name that was part of all of the 1940s all-decade teams. And by comparison, someone like Sid Luckman wasn't part of all 6 of them. Don Hudson, who many view as one of, if not the greatest player of all time in some circles, wasn't on there. But Al Wistert was part of every single first team all-decade of the 1940s, along with 4 other guys that are either on the 100th anniversary team or barely missing in the case of Bulldog Turner. So, Al Wistert was also listed as someone who, like, they had Bob Carroll, Pete Palmer, John Thorne, and listed him as the most deserving tackles and listed him as the most deserving one of enshrinement. And all the ones on here all made it. Like Link Lyman, Joe Steidar, Duke Slater, Pete Henry, Cal Hubbard, Ed Healy, Bruiser Kennard, and Turk Edwards. The only one outside of Worcester that's missing out is George Christensen, but he was, number 10. But Al Worcester is number 1 ahead of all those other guys that are sandwiched between him. And the middle guys got in. Slater took way too long, but he made it in finally. But Worcester was ranked as the very top guy, and he's not in. And not only that, George Allen wrote how he was a sure tackler, best against the run, and as an offense, he would overpower everyone in the pass block. He might not look like that from his size, but he made up for it for his power. And in my opinion, there is no deserving name on the official list of 12 from the Hall of Fame than Al Worcester. It's taken way too long. Get him in already.
Okay. Brian, you put in a really good point in chat. If you want to share that with everyone.
Yeah, from the limited footage that I've been able to view, looking at these grainy guys in black and white, Worcester looked good, and I would say he did look like a Hall of Famer, but not so much a Hall of Famer like a Joe Green or a Reggie White or Aaron Donald or someone like that, that his play matches up with the level of accolades that he received during his career, especially compared to teammate Vic Sears, who, really made Worcester's life much, much easier by, taking on blockers, occupying people, so like an Aaron Smith or something like that, so that he could make more plays. But together on the offensive line, they were completely dominant and made Steve Van Buren's life so much easier.
No, that's a really good point. Are there a few other points that we want to make here on Al Worcester? I'm sure there are. Yes, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, you're muted, Ron.
Sorry about that. I would just say sometimes I try to simplify it a little bit more than the minutia. And if you look at Al Worcester, and this also applied to Maxie Bond, also applies to Randy Gradishar, and I'm sure a few others. If someone in 90% of their years as a starter is all Pro Bowl elected by peers or any combination thereof, that's a pretty good indication that they were pretty darn dominant. Yeah. And it's open and shut. Do they belong? Heck yeah. And Worcester definitely belongs.
Yeah, and I don't speak up against Worcester here. I just want to call it, like, the first couple of years he was in the league, maybe it was a little easier to dominate due to WW2. And I wonder, like, he's another one of those guys, because of the position that he played, kind of fell victim to the fact that he didn't really have stats. And I think that's another thing that maybe hurt him. It's a good point that Brian brings up about, like, was he really that much better than Vic Sears? Well, at least the media at the time thought so, and that could be like here or there, right? But when you look at a guy that's waited an incredibly long time, he was all decade, 2-time champ, and he certainly was a big part of that. Like Steve Van Buren certainly got the attention of 48, 49, but he was a big, big part of that. He certainly feels long overdue.
Do we know from that back-to-back Eagles team, how many people do we have that are inducted?
Look at those
Eagles, obviously, but obviously there's more than that.
I'm looking at it right now.
It's not a whole lot off the top of my head from what not that I really
let's see. In 1948, you had Greasy Neal, their coach, Pete Pihos, Steve Van Buren, and Alex Wojciechowski. Sorry, that's his name still this day.
And Wojciechowski or something like that.
And then in the next year, you had Chuck Benderek as well added to the mix.
No Polish people on Long Island, I see.
Not many, and if they do, they usually have SKI in their last name.
Okay.
You know what else?
It's made up of mostly Irish and Italians. Further west, you get more, Jews.
I know, I'm just sort of like curious there, but like Al obviously is somebody that I think
Hey, Kirk.
I don't think. Yeah, go ahead.
There's this one other thing too. I mean, just looking at Twitter recently in terms of discussion by historians and folks who have seen the game or know people who've seen the game. I know Upton Bell has been very bullish on Al Wistert being long overdue, and the
Interesting.
NFL former players folks as well. And that's a pretty, and those are folks who saw him play and saw his impact to the team and the league comparative to other players.
Okay. All right.
Six first team all decades. I gotta get into that. All 6 of them first team.
All right. So up next we got Sterling Sharp, and I'd like Jeff to open this up because as I've noticed with a lot of Bears fans, they have a lot to say about Packers.
Yeah,
That's quite obvious. That's quite obvious, Kirk,
So-
because when it comes to the Packers, that's the only
You
primary
think-
goal
okay,
of.
you know what?
When it comes to the Packers, the first thing that comes to mind for the group known as Bears football.
Bears football.
It's nothing but nonsense.
Well, here's the thing, though. Is
Jeff,
that-
you could actually do the whole ventriloquism there too. I had no idea.
I apparently, right? He's even a Virginia kid too. Poor guy. Imagine that. When you think about Sterling Sharp, he was one of those dudes that you just know. Like there are certainly numbers there. You talk about postseason resume, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first team All Pro, and he did that for several years with Mikowski as his quarterback, or some other variants when Mikowski was out, and then a very young and very early Brett Favre. So this was 88 to 94. This is before the 3 back-to-back MVP seasons of Sterling Sharp. If Sterling Sharp had even made it to 1996, we're not talking about him here. We wouldn't have been talking about him in relation to the Hall of Fame for 20 years, other than the fact that he was a first ballot guy, period. When you think about great dog, Kirk, see, that's what it's all about. This is a guy as a wide receiver, mind you. He was 4th in the league in MVP voting in 1992, and I think he was 8th in 1993. He's a guy that's actually led each of the Triple Crown categories. So you think about receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, led the league in receptions twice, led the league in receiving touchdowns twice. And this is in a 7-year span. And this is in a league, mind you, that had peak Jerry Rice. You know, it had some damn good wide receivers in that late 80s, early 90s stretch. And when I think about in that time, in that era, I think about Jerry Rice as like the unquestioned wide receiver GOAT. But in that time that I saw him, I thought of Sterling Sharp as just like one small notch below and the clear number 2 dude. When I think about him, you know, it's unfortunate we've seen the recent precedent for early guys like Kenny Easley, Terrell Davis, that had like 7-year careers that got in as modern candidates. Unfortunately, Tony Baselli's another one, right? Sterling Sharp didn't make it in time, and now he's here. And even in our conversations, it's kind of like, yeah, we know you feel like he should be in, and it's just a matter of finding the right place in the right slot. But when you look at him, like I could make an argument for him over several wide receivers that are already in camp.
I always looked at Sharp, and I'm curious what anyone thinks about this. I always look at Sharp as sort of without the Super Bowl, the running back version of Terrell Davis in terms of that brief, potent career that has a lot of what ifs.
Exactly. There's so much that goes on, like Kirk, with the story of Sterling Sharp. Primarily, as Schleggy has mentioned, he came into a time where the Packers were well removed from the Lombardi and the power sweep and whatever quarterback they could possibly come up with. Heck, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Sterling there at the time when they drafted what's his name? What's that dude from Michigan State, the tackle?
Tony
And Andrich was 89.
Oh yeah, Tony
Now,
Mandrich.
why did you make Chris like cry inside? There were 4 Hall of Famers drafted in that top 5 in 89, and you had to bring.
I know, but think about it. Think about it. What's funny that people, not you guys, but what's funny that some people forget is that the one dude that did not make the Pro Football Hall of Fame was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
I
Think
have
about
that
it.
somewhere.
He's
a
the
Canadian.
Darko Milicic of football in my
I'd
eyes.
like to hear Chris, the Packer fan, though, when we talk about Sterling Sharp. It's like I think it's kind of a testament that we got Bears fans that are pumping up Sterling Sharp. But I want to hear from Chris about this because it's would definitely be.
I agree. I agree. Go for it, Chris.
Yeah, so Sterling Sharp at the time, like you said, the Packers, they stunk.
I mean, they had one winning season, and that was in '82, and that was a strike shortened season before the 1989 season. But he came in, he had nobody around him. Like you said, Mikowski, serviceable quarterback, had some plays, got us to win against Chicago. That kind of was his highlight. And who caught the pass? Sterling Sharp. So, Sharp came in, he could do everything. He had speed, he was a big, strong guy. He did not miss a game. He had to end his career because of a neck injury, but he did not miss a single game. And in that final season, he still led the league in touchdowns. So he just showed up every weekend and did his job and did it better than everybody else on the field. And I think that's the best way to kind of put it for him there.
And the one last thing I'll throw in there for Sharp, if I recall correctly, his first career playoff game against the Lions, he had 3 touchdowns, including the game winner.
Yep. Kind of a scramble play with Favre there. Just kind of heaved it down the field, and he had beat the defense all the way down there.
So it's something that comes up with a guy like Sharp, right? Like, he didn't win much. Well, look at the team he played on. Like, Bears fans back in '89, we remember Mikowski going because he was across the line of scrimmage. But who did he throw that game-winning touchdown pass to with 14 seconds left? It was Sterling Sharp. Like, he was that dude unquestioned.
And since when in a world where Joe Thomas was the first ballot electee do we care about how many times somebody wins?
It's a fair point.
Well, exactly.
That's true. That's true.
The man went 1-31 in his last 32 games of his career. So
it's very
exactly.
team.
But just look at what Sterling had to deal with. Heck, forget just the NFL career. How about what he did growing up? I mean, you're coming from Glenville, Georgia. That's not exactly the hot spot in the state, mind you. Not only that, he had to take care of his family. Remember, when Barney Porter, his grandfather, God rest his soul, passed away, Sterling had to step up and be the man of the house. So that work ethic was instilled in him from the early days. If for no other reason, because he had his brother who could yap a little bit. I ain't gonna mention his name, Shannon. But then you go to South Carolina and did what he did, to go to Green Bay and then perform what he did, what I would have wanted to see is him in that Super Bowl against Denver. Can you just imagine? Obviously, Antonio Freeman and Mark Chmura and Dorsey Levens and Brett Favre, that was a pretty darn good offense. No one's going to deny that. But could you just imagine the Denver Broncos defense, as aggressive as they were under I can't remember who the defensive coordinator was for there. I apologize.
Greg Robinson.
Thank you very much. The aggressiveness that Greg Robinson used to bring with Romanowski, Tanuvasa, Neil Smith, Darian Gordon, Steve Atwater, they would not have been as aggressive as they were that day if Sterling Sharp was there, because Sharp would have easily carved up that Denver defense, the aggressiveness. If Marino and the Marks brothers could dominate the '85 Bears defense, which is kind of overrated, could you just imagine the aggressiveness of the Broncos and Sterling Sharp exploiting them? Shannon would have had a meltdown on that sideline because there's no way the Denver Broncos were going to be able to contain Sterling in that Super Bowl. If they can, if the Patriots can't control any Packers guy like an Andre Rison, how do you expect them to cover Sterling Sharp? Anyone?
Okay. Great. So let's move on to Del Schaffner. Does anyone want to take sort of the lead on that one? Who hasn't taken the lead yet?
Hey, Kirk, I got to drop off. Sorry.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for
I got to
being
drop
here.
off. It was great seeing everybody. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Take
no
care.
problem. And thank you for coming on and sort of telling us a little bit more about Lewis Wright. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Why the hell does Del Schaffner never get any traction in the process? Does anybody know? Is it just the lack of years?
Blame Gary.
Play?
What I'd like to do, though, if I could, I just want to see if I can get someone to sort of open up a little bit who hasn't sort of been the opener. Does anyone want to take on that role?
Bill Carroll.
All right, Bill, take it.
I'll do it. I think it's a great question. Why not Del Schaffner? And I think there's about 2 or 3 elements to it. Timing is everything, right? I think we've all heard that term many times in our lives. When Del Schaffner enters the league, the term Hall of Fame fullback was not something that people would raise an eyebrow at, right? It was the game was played between the tackles primarily. He enters the league in 57. And he's initially even a two-way player for just a little bit. He played a little bit defensive back even early on. and he's, a reserve, right? Appears in 10 games, but does very little. Next year, things change. A big change, right? So by a second year league, this is once again in a 12-game season. I just want to make sure that I mentioned that. This is in a 12-game season, goes for 1,097 yards. That's 21.5 yards per reception versus 51 receptions. So this was not, a possession receiver, ladies and gentlemen, or I guess gentlemen in this case. This was a burner, a person who, if you take a bad angle, if you slip coming out, like he's off 88 and out the gate. Had finished 4th in the UPI voting for MVP that year. Just had an amazing year. Obviously was a Pro Bowler that year. And then slips to 936 the next year. An injury-riddled year, and also injury-riddled year the next year, drops off the map to 122, but bounces back. This is in back-to-back seasons. 1,125 yards, 1,133 yards, 1,181 yards receiving. And once again, now obviously after 1960 onward, it's a 14-game season, so it's a little bit easier to break 1,000 yards, but he does it once in a 12-game season and then does it another 3 more times in 14-game seasons. And once again, look at these yards per receptions. 16.5, 21.4, 18.5. So he's getting those yards on relatively few numbers of receptions. His largest number of receptions in 1 year was 68. So he does all of his damage, a lot of his damage on big plays. I think that's part of it. The Rams were a good team, but they weren't the best team. Well, except once, but he played on a lot of good teams, but they were sometimes overshadowed by other teams. Johnny Unitas, unfortunately, is out there doing his thing on the East Coast, and the East Coast, I don't want to play the whole West Coast bias card. I mean, Los Angeles is not some sleepy backwater, necessarily not then nor now. But if you were playing in New York, if you were Y.A. Tittle, if you were, like I said, Johnny Unitas, if you were Sam Huff, you got way more shine than even the greatest players in other parts of the country. And Del Schaffner had a fantastic career, but always seemed to be, to some extent, a little bit in somebody's shadow. But he was a 5-time All-Pro and a 5-time Pro Bowler, voted on by his peers, and is on the Hall of Fame's all 1960s team. So when someone said, why not more traction? Yes, his career was relatively short. It played 125 games, which isn't that short, but shorter than some. And he dropped off the table, like I said, pretty hard. The beginning of his career did almost nothing. In the last couple of years of his career, did very, very little. 19 yards in receiving in the second to last year of his career, but that time he's a giant. And then 146 yards receiving. So his career, for all intents and purposes, ends back in 65. 66 and 67 are essentially throwaway years. So his meat of his career is 58 and to, like I said, 65. And even by 65, he's kind of a shot fighter a little bit. So the best years of his career is that 58 to 63 year, that run there, where he's a top 3 wide receiver. And why that isn't enough for some people, that is a great question. I would think that maybe now, with people being a little less tied to someone having to have a 12, 13, 14-year career, maybe now they'll be a little more permissive. But yes, there was a time when if you didn't have at least 10 good years, they almost wouldn't consider you. He didn't have 10 good years, but he had 5 amazing ones.
Hey, Bill, I tell you what I think part of it is, and I think Jack has talked about this in our group, right? Is one of the things he talked about is the senior process in particular seems to favor players that spent the majority of their time with one team. And when you look at Schaffner, you're talking about 50, I think it's 57 through 60s with the Rams.
Right.
Which is interesting to your point, like second biggest market in the country. He never played in a small market.
Nope.
He then comes to New York,
The biggest,
where he gets he's in the Big Apple, gets the big media market attention.
right.
And then he goes on there and he's a baller stud on 61, 62, 63 on some great Giants teams, but they never win a title.
Nope.
But guys like Sam Huff and Frank Gifford, Y.A. Tittle get all the kind of like pub and media attention.
Right.
And, you know, even when I look at recently, like I know there's the New York market kind of representative in the Hall of Fame process now. Like you never see him talk about Del Schaffner. And I
Nope.
wonder if part of that is like he's not associated just with the Giants his entire career. But when I look at it, like to your point, Bill, there's 5 phenomenal seasons. And there are guys in the Hall of Fame that might have 7 to 8 good seasons. Like Schaffner's got 5. It's almost a Sterling Sharp case in some ways, a little less, right? But there's
Well,
Not
actually, in a way,
I mean,
it's
you
Sterling
account
Sharp.
for the difference in passing volume and games played. Yeah.
here's a little fun fact for you guys. I don't know if you guys look at PFR like I do, but if you look at their Hall of Fame monitor, they show from everyone that played wide receiver starting from 1955 or later. There are only 4 guys in the history of the game since 1955 to the present who have achieved the first team All Pro from the Associated Press. Jerry Rice with 10, obviously. Lance Arworth with 6. Terrell Owens with 5. And Del Schaffner also has 5 as well.
Okay.
So those are the 4 guys. Rice made it first ballot. Allworth made it first ballot. Owens should have made it first ballot, but whatever. But Schaffner is still there waiting in senior purgatory. And unfortunately, he just died a couple years ago.
Right.
So,
All right, so we're going to move on to the next one, if that's okay. Just in the interest of time. We've got Albert Lewis next. I'm wondering if I can get either Brian or Pierce, because we've got our one group who have changed my mind a lot about Albert Lewis. I was not huge on this, and Lewis is very interesting to me. How he came in seemingly out of nowhere to be a finalist and has remained in the eye. Would either of you like to take that?
I can do for a minute. My twins are playing very loudly, so I might not be best for this. But he started as a nickelback, very talented, play inside, very strong defending the run. He was 6'2", 6'3", long arms, so he could press very well. Broadcast claimed he was kind of 4'3", but as we know, there's some puffery there, so he's probably a legit 4'4", which is fantastic for the 80s. Had some unfortunate injuries that caused him to miss some of his prime, but in the games that I've done, he by and large excelled. Like everyone, he had a couple of tough games. I know Lewis Lips or some of the guys from the Steelers gave him a little trouble, but very, very talented at cornerback. And this is all saying without even mentioning his special teams. 10 or 11 block punts among the most ever. He was also on kickoff coverage. He was on punt coverage. He even on windy days he could hold the ball for kickoff. He did literally everything, and a lot of it very well.
Okay, because I want to talk more about this because I'm so fascinated by his sudden ascension. So, and we again voted for him here. Is there anyone else who would like to sort of like go a little bit more and maybe just educate me? Like, what did I miss all this time? I didn't see a lot of Chiefs games that time.
That's what it is.
Pro Scout Inc. gave him 5 blue seasons, which is the top of the top for the rating.
And I think what you're looking at, Kirk, is he was just one of those guys. He played in KC, never won a title, played on some nondescript teams. By the time the Chiefs got really good defensively in the late 80s, early 90s, then the attention's on Derek Thomas and Neil Smith. Then he goes to the Raiders in the 90s where they're not the best. I put in the chat for this. Like, to me, I think of him as like a combination of Darrelle Revis in coverage and Antoine Winfield Light in run defense, and then Steve Tasker in special teams. Like, we didn't even talk about I think it's 11 career block punts. You know, so when you think about a guy like, you would take Albert Lewis in the top 5 of the NFL draft now and drop him into the game, and you would feel great about where he's at. He could cover, he could play the run. He wasn't used as much as a blitzer as maybe he should have been, because he could do that with that speed coming off of the edge. And then, like I said, you add the special teams value. I think part of it is, Kirk, is he just kind of slipped through the cracks. We never really talked about him. He didn't get the media attention during his career. And I think what you saw is once we started being intentional and talking about him, he's one of those candidates that the more you discuss them and you get the context, you're like, holy crap. Like, holy Canadian crap. What did I miss out on all this time?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
you know, like
Yeah,
I
thank you for translating that for me. I appreciate it.
I was gonna
Hey,
say
Ryan.
something, adding how you
Hey,
all
Ryan.
doing, adding
Hey
to,
Ryan, how
but
you doing?
I'm doing all right. Adding to what you're saying, you know, this guy had a four, you know, a four straight times he went to the Pro Bowl. 2 times he was a first team All Pro. But it's always about the success because in 1987, the Chiefs were 4-11. 1988, they were 4-11, 4-11-1. 1989, they were 8-7-1. And excuse me. And then the final year he was in, the final year, you know, the final year of that 4-year span where he went to the Pro Bowl, they went 11-5. They lost in the wild card playoffs. But as you said, the attention started focusing more on Kevin Ross and Derek Thomas. So, you know, I think if they had won a title, if they made deep runs in the playoffs, I think we would be talking a lot more about Albert Lewis because from what you guys telling me, he was probably one of the best defensive backs in the NFL during the 1980s, along with guys like Ronnie Lott. Because like Ronnie Lott is the first person that comes to my mind. I mean, I was born in the mid '80s, so I don't, you know, have any memories of Albert Lewis or Ronnie Lott. To me, Ronnie Lott is the guy that did Fox NFL Sunday when they first started. So yeah, you know, I think if you look at when the Chiefs started getting good, it was mainly after, you know, at the tail end of Albert Lewis's 4-year run in the Pro Bowl in Kansas City.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the other
let me
thing,
add.
go ahead,
But
Ron. Go ahead, Ron.
No,
Yeah, by all
I'm
means.
sorry. I just a real quick one because I presented him for Modern in our group, and the thing with Albert Lewis, I used was quadruple double because this guy had obviously the big interceptions. I think he got in the 40s, right?
Yep.
But he also blocked over the I think 11 kicks, like you said. He was someone that teams had a game plan for. Herm Edwards said, "Oh, like our whole game plan was do not let him block a kick in this playoff game, whatever you do." And boom, who blocks a kick like the first kick of the game? And I think he also had double digits in touchdowns and sacks or maybe fumbles. I know it was like
That
4 categories that he had double digits in, which is completely unique for a defensive back corner. Now you're talking about safeties, it's different. They're playing center field, so they'll get maybe a little more on the interception totals, but that was just freakish talent. And it's good that like the Peter Kings and some of the other selectors said, "Oh yeah, hey, we've overlooked this guy. They got some late speed, but unfortunately, he just didn't make it in Modern this past like January, February."
yeah, and it's
One last,
frustrating because
I was
they
gonna
could have
say something.
waited.
Hold on. I was looking also at the thing about, you know, I'm on Pro Football on his Pro Football Reference profile, and they say the players of career of who was similar quality and shape. If you take the first 10 years of his career, he is compared, according to PFR, Ty Law and Ken Riley, who are both in the Hall of Fame, along with Brian Dawkins and Rondé Barber. He is listed in that contemporary, in that same class as 4 Hall of Famers: Rondé Barber, Brian Dawkins, Ken Riley, and Ty Law. Excuse me. So that's, and also Daryl Green. So that's great company right there. You know, that is a tremendous company. And all 5 of those guys are in the Hall of Fame.
They're legends.
The one other thing I know we got to move on to the next guy. One other thing I call for Albert Lewis, I believe it was Tony Dungy, and I think this was the crux of where all of a sudden it's like 19 years that they largely ignored me. So one-time semifinalist, it was Tony Dungy that was talking about. And this is a guy that's been around Sapp and Brooks and Lynch and Barber and a guy named Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne. And when he was talking about Albert Lewis, when a guy like Tony Dungy, who would know better than most, says like this guy was as highly graded as any player that I ever had. You say, excuse me, including Peyton Manning, and he doesn't stutter when he says that, Kurt. I think that gives you like when we start talking about the things in context and people start to go, holy crap, now it's in year 20, we've screwed up. And unfortunately, I think they got it wrong. Rondy Barber could have, no disrespect, could have waited one more year to get Albert Lewis in so he didn't get kicked into the senior pool. Like, that was something, like, they got Sam Mills in year 20. They should have been able to get it done here. I know.
Not only that, you were saying about that with the Albert Lewis, from my understanding from listening to the Eye Test podcast from Clark Judge and Ira Kaufman, they said that one of the voters didn't even know who Albert Lewis was at all. Like, they'd never even heard of him, which what also kind of even twisted the knife even further for him was that he was, when they made the cut from 15 to 10, he was still there. And I think Lewis might have been the very last guy they cut off, from what I've heard. So he was very, very, very close to making it as a modern in his final year, but he just missed.
Yeah, before we move on to the next one, I just saw Brian in our chat just sort of like put down he was Mr. Everything, and I noticed how a lot of you sort of agreed with that. So that's really sort of interesting to look at. I'm going to be certainly personally looking at a lot more of Albert Lewis for that. We're going to move on to Vern Llewellyn, and we're going to go to Mr. Packer. Chris, take it away, my friend.
All right, thanks, Kirk. Yeah, so Vern Llewellyn, he's a 1920s, 1930s Packer. So there isn't the video of his games, the way he played. But he was 4-time All-Pro, was a member of the back-to-back Packer championships from 29 through 31. Really is the one player from the senior era that Packers historian Cliff Crystal says is the most deserving of selection to this to the Hall of Fame. And unfortunately, he's not even on the actual list this year. So he's really been overlooked, and a lot of it is because he played in the era before stats, played in the era before television, and when the Hall of Fame opened the doors, he was already 31 years removed from playing. So the game had already even changed between the time he ended his career and when they first started electing players into the Hall of Fame. He was the back that Curly Lamb was selected as part of his all-time team ahead of actual Hall of Famers like Johnny Blood and Clark Hinkle. He's just been lost to time at this point, and it's really unfortunate. And hopefully, with some of the attention being drawn back to some of these super seniors here, maybe his story can be told. We got to get more people that are able to engage with the younger voters now on the senior committee in the way that they're used to, either through Twitter, through putting together short little video clips on websites, highlighting any kind of comments from people that have mentioned him in the past, like how they felt he was the best player they went up against and things like that. So right now he's out there. He's more than deserving. If there had been a MVP in the 1920s and 30s, he'd have been MVP in a couple of those seasons where they won championships. But unfortunately, we don't have the stats to look at. We don't have the video to look at. We just have words written in newspapers from that era that tend to get lost.
And I posted, just for reference for this group, a couple of interesting quotes from like people that know the Packers from the time. Blood McNally, who was one of his teammates that was a charter member in '63, for him to say that it should have been Llewellyn that made it and not himself or Cal Hubbard first, I think is pretty striking. Like, why would you say that, right? There's a graciousness there, but that's got to say something. And then, when you talk about the other quote that I attributed there from an early Packers player talking about, like, he's been around the team for 50 years and that was the best player he saw in the organization's history. Like, that's pretty powerful stuff.
Very much so.
I think also Vinny, Ron, and I, more Vinny and Ron, because you encouraged him. I was hoping that he was going to join us tonight, but unfortunately he couldn't. Corey, and I apologize. What's his last name?
Stolzenbach.
Thank you, Corey, for watching. I apologize. But he sent me a few things on, well, obviously to Vinny and then to me later, regarding some of his work. He's a sports writer in Indiana, and so some work like I don't know if there's some points there, Ben, because you've got that up that you want to share about Vern Llewellyn.
Sure. Now, for those that don't know, Corey is someone who's very similar to myself. He's 31, and he loves a lot of the World War II era kind of guys. And I've been teaching him a lot about, hey, you should go look at these pre World War II people, and especially the pre NFLers. And he saw Vern Llewellyn, not too long ago, and he wrote this amazing piece. He's a really good writer too, by the way. He's written numerous cases as well, and I want to say his case. It is a bit long. He goes into a lot of detail with it too.
Well, yeah, just if you can, just if you can, like just some of the bullets, because we got to move on to the next one, if you can.
He said, for instance, for 5 straight years, those including the 1929, 1930 NFL championship teams, Llewellyn led the Packers in scoring, led the NFL in touchdowns in 1920 and 1930 with 9 each. You think of the all-decade teams, a big measuring stick and accolade to help advance one's case, and also the ones that were on the all-decade teams but shouldn't have been in, arguably. Think of all those in the all-decade teams but should have been. Some names on the all-decade teams that stand out, Maxie Vaughn, as well as Harold Jackson, and Vern Llewellyn comes to mind. And the retroactive 1920s all-decade team surely has one person missing from it, Llewellyn. Willis argues that Llewellyn was equal or better than the halfbacks in the 1920s all-decade team in Red Grange, Jim Thorpe, Curly Lambeau, and Joe Guyong, all of them who have busted in Canton. Red Grange's pages on Pro Football Reference lists him as being a first-team All-Pro in 1930 and 1931. Pro Football Reference as Llewellyn and first-team All-Pro from 1926 to 1929, with a lot of indicating he should have received such an honor in 1930. Keep in mind the Galloping Ghost is one of the most famous football players of all time and a charter member of the Hall of Fame. In fact, Willis, a Dutch Clark biographer, would have retroactively named Vern Llewellyn as the NFL MVP for 1929 and for 1930. Crystal suspects Llewellyn might have won in those years too if the AP voted on the award. Crystal considered the 1929 NFL championship victory next to the Ice Bowl as the greatest in the history of the franchise and probably did more for the team than any game leading up to the Ice Bowl. I don't worry. Once I'm done with my Seawolf case for you, Corey, afterwards, I'm going to do Vern Llewellyn just for you, because other than me, I don't think I've seen anyone be as passionate for these older people as much as you have. And granted, you've said that, I run laps around you too. Yes. But you inspire me too, Corey. And Llewellyn absolutely deserves to make the Hall of Fame. Even though I'm a big Dilweg guy, with what you've researched, I'm very much willing to give it to Llewellyn, even if Dilweg has to wait a little longer, because you really did convince me.
I have never run a lap, so that's an interesting thing for me. But anyway,
one last thing, really quickly. I think Brian and I have been pasting some other things about Llewellyn. Brian's point around the punting piece in an era where that was so important. Like, he was elite as a punter, on top of all the skills as a back. What was it, Brian? Was it 51 career touchdowns?
51 career touchdowns. And he's credited
51.
39.5, I think, net yards per punt or something like that at one point. I mean, that's estimated because, once again, he's pre-statistical era, but he was a great all-around player.
But that was an era where they punted the ball inside of the 40 or 35 sometimes, right? And he would kick it out of bounds. So, he was a top dog in several different ways in this era. And it's a crime that, he was one of those guys that played very early. He didn't get in the first few years. He had no chance afterwards.
Yeah. When I saw Ira Kaufman at the Cleveland airport along with Peter King, I told him about, Pudge and everything else. He said, about Vern Llewellyn? I said, oh, I love Vern Llewellyn. And, I just went into some of the other names too. And Llewellyn was someone that was very high on his list. And he was very happy that they've gotten to 3 seniors and whatnot. Don't worry, Jeff. I have a few other names I'm going to go throughout. But
oh, I know you are.
Don't worry.
I think another point when we talk about these guys from the 20s and 30s, right? There's this whole issue like, why aren't they already in, right? And so people start to pick up their cases as if there's some kind of major flaw that the voters just wouldn't elect them. But if you look at some of the work that Jack Silverstein's been doing and looking at the trends in voting and how quickly the Hall voters when it was established in 1963, how quickly they moved through those early era players in the NFL. And then the decades that went by, for example, where they weren't electing guys in the 20s and 30s. It's not that guys like Delwood and Lewin aren't qualified, is that they were never really considered. They didn't have a time where they were long enough on the ballot. I mean, if you look at how the process works today, right, you get these modern guys, they get 20 years on that ballot, and then they jump into the senior pool and they get the momentum and it works for them. But guys like this, because the Hall didn't start till 1963, they elect a bunch of guys from the 20s and 30s early on, and there's these huge gaps. It's not that they're not deserving, they just get surpassed because the voters move on to guys from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And they just, the senior pool was created in 1972. So a whole slew of these guys had less than 10 years on that ballot. And by then, the voters were already moving on to the 40s and 50s. So they never got a fair shot. They never got enough time to have that case kind of mature and percolate among the voters at the time, because they were just surpassed by others. And it's no fault of a flaw in their resume. It's just they just didn't get considered long enough to move to the top of the pile.
Yeah, Paul, and it's real similar to how certain positions were overlooked. Obviously, the special teams has always been an issue, but safety was pretty much ignored unless like a generational and then some guy until 2017. And then they started to correct. I mean, you have to find the slots to do it, and folks just fall through the cracks, unfortunately. And that's what happened back then too.
Okay, so we got to move on to the next one, and I'm going to pass it over to my partner in many things, and we're going to be promoting that while we're doing the tabulations. My good friend, it's funny, I consider you all my friends, and I've never met any of you, but Evan Nolan, who is going to, I'm going to ask you to open up with Bob Kuchenberg.
Yeah, so of all the people on this list, no one has ever been closer to getting the Hall of Fame without getting in than Kuchenberg. Kuchenberg, it was unfortunately came up during what I like to call the stupid era of NFL Hall of Fame voting. He was a finalist every year from 2002 through 2009. Historically, or the stories at the time, was that he was one of the final five candidates in both 2004 and 2005. But he has four things that are working against him. One is the fact that, honestly, Kuchenberg was kind of a dick, and people didn't like him, particularly at the time around then. Jason, oh my God, his name just ran out of my head. The defensive end for the Dolphins, who made the Hall of Fame. Jason Taylor, thank you.
Or as we call him, Joy Taylor's big brother.
Joy Taylor's big brother. Was one of those people with constant complaints. Kuchenberg always found some reason to be upset about the Dolphins, and just he got a reputation of being a complainer and like, hey, the good old days are always good, and you're not. The other problem that he has, the other three words that are working against him, are Longer, Little, and Stevenson, which are three other offensive linemen, all from the Dolphins, who he played with. Now, Longer and Little were on the same offensive line with him in that undefeated 72 team. Stevenson came a little bit later in 80. Stevenson, interestingly, was 80 to 87, got in basically 8 seasons. When he retired, Kuchenberg was the all-time leader in games played for the Dolphins. That's since been passed by actually both Jason Taylor and Dan Marino. So he's still third. But he has been there multiple times right at the top, and they didn't vote him in. And still in my opinion, the single dumbest Hall of Fame class of all time, the class of 2005, where we had 4 quarterbacks elected. No offense to Fritz Pollard and Benny Friedman, who both deserve, like Marino, Young, Friedman, and Pollard all deserve to be in. I'm not arguing that, but the fact that we only had quarterbacks elected is insane. But they just didn't. There was something going on in that room. They decided to like Kuchenberg. They decided they didn't like Michael Irvin. He had to wait a couple more years to get in. And honestly, part of the backup we have now is from the fact that they didn't put Kuchenberg in when they should have. And he passed away, 4 years ago now, without ever really having a shot at getting in. So those 72 Dolphins teams, there's now 6 people from those teams who are from the 6 people from the 72 Dolphins are in. So we have Nick Bonacotti, is Larry Zonka, Bob Greasy, Longer, Little, and Paul Warfield. Of course, Shula is in as well as a coach, and Bobby Beathard got in a couple years ago as the director player personnel. So the question is, again, it's a one championship team. It's an offensive line where you already have two guys in and a third one who comes later. It's an uphill battle for him, I think, at this point. And we see this because he was allegedly numbers between 4 and 6 on the seniors list last year and isn't even on the list as someone they're considering at this point this year. They just need to get over this, put the man in the hall, and let's just move on with our lives. Legitimately, he should have been enjoying this since 2000 and I'll say 4 at the latest, 5 at the absolute latest. He would have had the last 14 years of his life as a Hall of Famer, and we wouldn't have had to still be dealing with this at this point. That's all I say about it.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Bob Kuchenberg make it to like the final 5 like twice or something and missed out?
It was twice. I've heard anecdotally it was 3 times. I know 04 and 05. I've heard also 02. I don't actually have any proof of that. They only elected 4 and 02. But yeah, definitely in 04 and 05, he was one of the final 5. And like of the final 5 guys in 05, they only picked 2 of them.
Yeah, Ron, it looks like
there was also a situation with Kuchenberg when he went to seniors, and I happened to be at the Hall of Fame, not to name drop, but I ran into Ira Kaufman, who was chatting with Harvey Green, the former PR guy for the Dolphins, and Harvey's contention was, okay, Bob was like this close in seniors one year, and then the next year, someone who, I mean, here's Kuchenberg, an 8-time finalist as modern, right? And someone in seniors who'd never even been a finalist or even considered leapfrogged him. and it's just perplexing. It's a mystery why that's happening, how it's happened. And I know it's limited slots, and you have all these seniors who are all very deserving and the backlog. But
I think it's an interesting point because 2 of the 3 seniors last year, Ron, keep me honest here, I don't know that Klecko or Riley were ever modern semifinalists or modern finalists.
No, neither was Howley either. Howley wasn't one either.
Yeah, but I classify Howley as different. Like he should have been in generations.
Klecko was a semifinalist in the 2020 class. Right. He was one of those people on the big long list.
So was Howley. But no, what happened though was when they went to the seniors, and that same thing with coach contributors, with 12 people voting, the committee used to be 9, and they would have, my understanding is 5 people each year making the decision, and it would be a different 5 people the next year. Well, maybe like the same chairperson, because obviously out of 9 people, 5 plus 5 is 10, right? And so you'd have different lines of thinking every other year, basically. And the Cincinnati folks will tell you they were so excited that Riley was like this close runner-up, and like the next year, crickets. Like, oh, he wasn't even considered. And they're like, how could that happen? But that was what the old process is. And just to finish, now that it's 12 people, all 12 of those semifinalists that you see on the official list for tomorrow, all 12 of those get a 5-minute presentation in the room. It's not just like one guy that's a favorite or something like that. And there's also historians in the room as well to provide their take on things. So it's a lot different and it's a lot better, but we have to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Sorry, Kirk, have you done Super Bowl 8 in your review yet?
Paul and I have done it. We just haven't posted it. Wait, did we do Super Bowl 8? Yeah, we did. Yeah, we have. We just haven't posted it up yet. We've got like 4 or 5. I'm going to do that in our section where we're counting all the votes. I'm going to be plugging a bunch of things.
Because I just want to bring Super Bowl 8 up for a second, because Kuchenberg played that whole game with a broken arm and absolutely dominated Alan Page in that game. If you go back and watch Super Bowl 8 and watch Kuchenberg, he dominated a Hall of Famer with a broken arm. So, I mean,
go
ahead.
If I can, I was going to say with Kuchenberg, you brought up the point, Evan, it's a good one about like, we talked about in our group before about like how many Steelers from the Steel Curtain do you need in the Hall of Fame? And then you could get to that place where you ask that certain question around how many Dolphins from the 70s do you need in? But if I think about Kuchenberg, technically, this is a guy that was a part of 4 teams that went to the Super Bowl, if you include the 82 team. Like he was a starter.
He's only there for 4. The Dolphins have been to 5. He was only in 4 of those.
That's what I'm saying. So you're talking about they went to 3 straight Super Bowls, 71 through 73 plus 82. He was a starter on the line on all 4 of those years. Keep me honest there. Yes, he played with Langer and yes, he played with Little, but that hasn't stopped other teams such as the Steelers from getting a number of guys in. And it fascinates me for a guy to at some point in time was viewed that he was a finalist this many times. He was this close last year to then, like, this is one of these ones when I look at the process, there's some good things that come out of the process in the expanded pool, no doubt. But then when I look at a guy like Kuchenberg and you say he got leapfrogged by other guys that were never modern finalists, and he was several times. This is a guy that has rings, he has championship experience. I just can't understand why he hasn't been in. Go ahead, Kurt.
I mean,
Well, I was just going to say, like, oh, sorry, Ryan, go ahead, please.
I think the thing is we always talk about the Steelers and the Dolphins, and you have so many players that are in the Hall of Fame that are from the Steelers and the Dolphins. And I think what you have is a lot of these teams, many of these teams, these writers, you don't have those guys advocating for them. Like you have so many guys from the Dolphins and so many guys from the Steelers that advocate for these players. They beat the pavement down and say, hey, look, we want these guys in the Hall of Fame. And then you have someone like Bob Kuchenberg, who should definitely be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, look, he played on 4 teams that went to the Super Bowl. He played on 3 straight Super Bowl teams. He got Super Bowl rings. And how is it that he's getting leapfrogged over guys who don't have the resume that he has? Like that he does that don't have the resume where it's all pros, Pro Bowls, this, that, and the third. So it's like and I agree, there are some good things about that, about the voting process, but then there are some bad things because we now see that some of these voters have basically, they have this like they have like this pick and choose thing. Like we're gonna pick and choose who we want to put in the Hall of Fame.
I think if I could just, because we got to move on to the next one, just because like Evan and I, we talk about this like weekly on our show. Voters are voting for people that sometimes they know. And as Evan sort of opened up, Bob was not exactly a likable person. And we've seen this in all the halls of fame. I mean, obviously we're talking football here, but we know this extends elsewhere, where if people who are voting on them don't like them, it hurts. I cannot say without Evan and I got to know like Richmond Webb a little bit, and he's a great guy, and it sure helps me want him to be in the hall a lot more, I'll tell you that. But it can work inversely. Mm-hmm. And I think with Bob, we're seeing people who probably dealt with him and thought, I hate this guy, and they can be a gatekeeper. It's like when I tell my wife, she says, you weren't too sarcastic at the border. No, I'm not. They can control something for me. But anyway, I guess we should move on to the next one. Hader, I don't know, or Hader or Ron, because like this is sort of your West Coast thing. I'm wondering if one of you can open up with Lester Hayes, whichever one of you feels more comfortable.
Yeah, I'll handle it.
Okay.
Let's see, Lester Hayes was I'm gonna write it down. 5-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro, 1-time second team All-Pro, 2-time Super Bowl champion, Hall of Fame 80 team. And did I say Defensive Player of the Year? That name? Like that already sounds like a good laundry list of accolades to me. And he was a semi-finalist last year. So, in his best season, he had 13 interceptions. And he's likely to now as a shutdown corner that's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I would say to add to that, he wasn't necessarily a shutdown corner. He was a great cornerback, but he was a guy who could go get the ball. I mean, that's, those interceptions matter. The stick 'em, making the big play for at big moments for teams.
I think if you go back and watch Hayes a little bit, like I called out here, a third of all of his interceptions happened in that great 80 season where he was Defensive Player of the Year. And maybe there's a little bit of that. He's so closely associated with Stickum, which is entirely unfair because you could call the Raiders of the 70s the Stickum Raiders, but they weren't the only team. But you could argue Fred Biletnikoff was that guy, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Paul and I are learning that.
Yeah, so as I think about Lester Hayes, though, it's like he has like some really, as Hader called out, like some really great accoutrements and accolades, but I wouldn't think of him as the same class of like a Michael Haynes, and they were teammates in '83. You know, when you start going through that list of corners, and it's like a third of his interceptions happened in one season. Like he had a nice run there, a good peak of a few years, but I think, Ron, to your point, I don't ever recall when I've gone back to watch Lester Hayes games of viewing him as like a shutdown corner. I thought of him as a pretty good corner with some good ball skills, but Brian's layered on here like he had another season. You add that in, and half of his interceptions are in 2 years. So there's like this very bright, hot burning peak of a couple of years and a good player. But, you know, when I think about Albert Lewis, I would take Albert Lewis over Lester Hayes.
Agree.
No doubt in my mind.
I would too.
Both entertaining and great players, though.
Yeah. Also,
But
when
Lewis
it came
a step
to
above.
also with Lester Hayes, he was a finalist 4 times as a modern era candidate too. So like you look at like Bob Kuchenberg, who was a modern finalist 8 times and was, you know, one of the 12 last year. Lester Hayes also has somewhat similar, as he was a former modern era finalist. So in a way, I'm kind of surprised that someone like how like a Charlie Connerly, it didn't really push him over the official 12 in this instance. But you know, we made up for it in our own. So I hope he's happy about that.
Yeah, and I think with Hayes, to your point, it is interesting, but I wonder if part of that is just the way our conversation has kind of went, right? Is he can get to a certain point with the stats, like he was a member of the '80s All-Decade team. He was a Defensive Player of the Year. He's got 39 career picks and not the longest of careers. But then once you get in the room, you start talking about him, you compare him to other contemporaries or other players at the position. The resume doesn't hold up quite as strongly as and I wonder if like our conversation, Vinny, kind of mirrors what has happened in the actual process for him.
Probably. I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I am surprised that in his later years they didn't just give it to him. But then again, you know, we don't really have many instances of a Worley or a Mills. We have more instances of like a Matthews or a Lewis or a Jacoby or Walls. Those guys that make it as a finalist in their final year of modern eligibility and just fall off into the senior abyss. Not even a pool, it's an abyss at this point.
Yeah, but he also checks the box as far as Defensive Player of the Year. He also Super Bowls. I think they won at least 1 or 2 of those Super Bowls. So that
What is he?
that like checks the
looking at
box
that
for him.
generation
I'm
stuff
not
on
saying it
Baltimore?
puts him in, but I'm just saying that's in his favor. That's what the selectors look at as one of the components.
He was a
Sorry,
terrific
Michael.
corner and had a very intensely, someone said, like white hot peak that just didn't last very long. When I stack him up against guys like Eric Allen, but when I stack him against guys like Pat Fisher, and some of these guys didn't even sniff the hall, but I still think that they did more different things as well or better. I mean, despite his diminutive size, Fisher was terrific in run support, and Hayes was good in run support. I think it'd be fair to say solid, but Fisher was better. Fisher was a better blitzer, though obviously, you know, corners blitzing is not how you decide whether or not they get in the Hall of Fame, but Fisher was one of the better blitzing corners despite being rather diminutive. Somebody has talked about Dave Brown. I mean, Dave Brown was an absolute interception machine and was left unprotected, right, in the expansion draft because the Steelers were so deep at corner at the time. And I think he was playing safety. I think he was lost at safety for the Steelers and then moved to corner with the Seahawks. But there's a lot of good corners that aren't in the Hall of Fame. I guess we talked about Louis Wright earlier. I have Louis Wright well above Hayes. I have Fisher a little bit above Hayes. I have Dave Brown and Evans and Walls slightly above Hayes as well. So I just think there's a bit of a backlog at the position. First of all, that hurts Hayes.
Lamar Parrish. I'm sorry. Did you say Lamar Parrish, Bill?
Wow.
I said, Bill, did you say Lamar Parrish?
I was going to leave Lamar Parrish for you because I knew that would be your was it
and Bobby Boyd.
That's your pet cat.
Oh man.
Okay,
no.
Hey,
No Lamar
guys,
Parrish today, guys.
Yeah, let's save that because we're already at 8:30, and I want to make sure we're getting through everybody. Still got 5 more.
So we got
I'll be here
Elsie
for
Greenwood
8 a.m.
next, and if I'm going to sort of voluntold somebody only because we've been watching some of that. Paul, do you want to open up with a bit of LC? Sorry, maybe you did, but you and I have been watching a lot of old Steelers games.
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of mixed feelings about his case actually. So
that's fine, right?
Let me just sort of hit the highlights, and I mean, there's some others who can chime in. I mean, he is at that level where, again, playing on a great defense, a lot of great sacks in those Super Bowls, key plays. So he's got some of those pieces, and for me, it's just sort of there's a couple, challenges with his, and not his resume, I guess, where he lines up against his peers and others who are thinking about whether they're on this list or from that era, and wondering, is he distinct enough, a rise above many of the peers in that defensive position to a point where, yeah, he should be there. Whereas we know, in that era, there are other great defensive players that aren't getting any consideration. And I'm not saying they're all Hall of Fame worthy, but he seems to be he's getting a little more credit than and to be honest with you, I think he really deserves. I think there's some issues there. Again, we've hit on this earlier. The Steelers defense, are we going to elect all 11 starters? I mean, I don't mean to be but it's a fair point. When's it?
No, it is because like you and I, right, buddy? Like we've been watching all that stuff, and like we've been impressed with Manny Fernandez, a 0-time Pro Bowler, right? And
unblockable in his prime.
So I guess
we watched, but yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you're right. I mean, it illustrates what we've been talking here, right, about representation. By the way, Lester Hayes, those two Oakland Raiders teams in the early '80s only have 3 Hall of Famers on there. Just a food for thought for Lester Hayes. But yeah, so I struggle a little bit with his case. I think you get to a point where it's a great defense. We know about that defense. We know all the great players. Begin to wonder, is he a guy who benefited from all these great players around him, especially when we're talking about some of the great defensive players like Lambert and Mean Joe Green? You begin to wonder how much of it was him. And it's a fair criticism. I think you have to do some maybe folks have looked at some deep film to kind of separate out how he played in those defenses and his role. And to be honest with you, and again, if my assessment's wrong, fair enough. When people talk about that defense and the greatness, his name doesn't seem to come up, except for the fact that he's on that defense. And yes, I think at one point he stole most sacks in his Super Bowl career. I mean, he's got a couple things on there that look good on a resume. But for me, I just kind of wonder, given all the other guys we've been talking about, and as I mentioned, guys in his era who were similar positions who just aren't getting any movement at all, even to be thought about, is he getting a little more attention? And the voters don't seem to have any interest in him because they're not moving him forward.
But
so I don't mean negative about it. I mean, right, maybe some folks here could be more positive about it. I'm just sort of pointing out there's some.
No, I'm just going to ask.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just know that
you're Cowboys.
You've been watching him like I have. So,
and then those games he stands out, but he doesn't stand out, right? When we talk about those Steelers teams, Kurt, when we watch these games, yeah, there's a few areas where you see him come out and highlight, but we're spending a lot of time talking about the rest of the defensive guys.
Your Cowboys have 2 more Super Bowls.
I'm sorry, I was going to call it 2 things about Greenwood. And I think Brian's hammering this a little bit on Greenwood. Joe Green and his gravity, and talk about like the impact of Joe Green. We always think about Joe Green first on those defenses at the end of the day, as we should. LC Greenwood played, 13 seasons in the league, had 78 career sacks. I know it's a different era and so forth, but I'm sorry. If he was that great of a pass rusher, playing alongside Joe Green with some of the other guys on that defense, Dwight White, Ernie Holmes, I would expect more than 78 career sacks from Greenwood.
But they weren't counted. They weren't counted.
If we're going based off the unofficial accounts, which we do use leverage here.
They were counted. I hear that a lot, but they were counted.
Yeah. So the second thing I wanted to ask Paul is you talked about like the voters didn't have interest. At some point they did because he was what a 6, 7, 8-time finalist in the modern
Six-time
pool.
finalist. He was a final six
right.
times.
What do you think? I want to ask Paul this question because I know he's really good about understanding the process. Maybe Ron could weigh in on this one. Why did he go from like a multiple time finalist as a modern to now he's not even getting to like preliminary, like the top 25, let alone the top 12?
So I think one factor is, right, you've got 40 plus, now there's 50, right, in those voters. And okay, let's not disparage all 50 or 48 of them where there was in the time. I think there's a lot of name recognition going on with some of those voters. I think there's a lot of mystique about the Steelers defense that kind of goes through that 50. So you're going to get guys who kind of move forward that process and become repeat modern semifinalists and finalists. They don't get elected because there's not enough to move them forward. Then you fall into the seniors pool, and for years, as Ron just explained, there were only 9 and only 5 rotated every year, and now we have the 12. It's a narrower group. They're much more focused. I think the percentage, the number of folks in that room, although I suspect there's a few that aren't maybe at the level we would hope they would be, the voters, the quality of voting and the work that goes in by those committees, in my view, is much higher level than we're getting from the full 50. And when you get to down that level, it's clear to me that those 12 folks, or in the past, a 9 or 5, didn't see LC Greenwood at a level that they thought he should be. And I think it's the kind of things we've been talking about. They're pointing out many of the same flaws. Hey, listen, when you get down to a seniors pool of a small number and you got 12 people, and we've all done this, right? We've sat here and tried to make these elections ourselves. Often what happens is you look at the negatives and you point at a negative of a player and say, I got to get to 12. And I think it's easy to look at LC Greenwood and maybe justified to pick his case and say, yeah, he's just another guy in that Steelers defense. We have enough, move on. And that's the level of scrutiny I think he's getting now, and why he's not getting transit where he, among the 50, I think name recognition in the Steelers defense elevated him in the discussion for many, many years.
Yeah.
I think we just got to move on to the. Oh, sorry. Does anyone want to do
Oh,
one
I was
last?
just to say very briefly, Lyle Alzado, to me, was a better player and hasn't gotten a tremendous amount of traction. And I'll throw a hater a bone. Obviously, a different era, but Leslie O'Neal, to me, was a better player, and he hasn't gotten a lot of traction either.
Tombstone Jackson.
Yep.
I knew Ron was going to work that in.
Well, especially with shorter careers. I mean, just real quick, I was on a plane from Canton to Chicago on the way home. I was with a former defensive lineman from the Dolphins next to me, and I told him about Tombstone, showed him some highlights where he's just clubbing like seals, like these quarterbacks and offensive linemen, and this guy just couldn't. He's never seen anything like that.
That's awesome.
Except like Deacon Jones, maybe highlights.
But Deacon got to be on a Brady Bunch episode. All right, I'm showing my age.
But to be fair, Lyle Alzado did get to be on the Super Mario Brothers Super Show with Captain Lou Albano. He did appear in that one episode.
But guess who invented the head slap? It wasn't Deacon Jones. It was Tombstone Jackson.
Yep. I thought it was my dad.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Who would like to open up with Ox Emerson?
He's the one that's down the pipeline, but I want someone else to take that.
Oh, no, anyone?
No one wants to say Ox Emerson?
Penny, give us like one minute on Ox.
Okay, because no one else wanted to take him. Corey made another great case for him, but when I think of Ox Emerson, I think of the best player from the 1930s, not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He was a part of the Detroit Lions, even back when they were called the Portsmouth Spartans within Ohio, before George Richards bought the team, and their colors wasn't blue and silver yet. What happened was, during his entire career, he was a 6-time first-team All-Pro. 6-time first-team All-Pro on those amazing Lions teams that won the championship in 1934. If I'm not mistaken, it was 34, I think. And even look on the All-Decade team now, Yeah, there's some other names that you might see, maybe could get a little interest, maybe Hall of very good. But Ox Emerson stands out like a sore thumb and a really sore thumb. He was a finalist in the 2020 Centennial class, and he's one of the three names that the PFRA officially supports, along with Al Wistard and Laverne Dilwig. I would say, his time should be now, but until the Hall decides to do a super senior section that puts in one pre 1960s guy, and hopefully that includes pre NFLers too. Ox Emerson, I can't see making it this year, but I do think he's very strongly deserving, and I would argue the best guard, as well as a quality center and a linebacker too. Don't forget, but I mostly know him as a guard, not in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
That's my
does anyone want to do anything more? And again, I don't want to. I'm not trying to speed this up. Only to not to disrespect Ox Emerson. Just this. I wanted to set everything at 4 minutes. That hasn't quite gone the way I wanted it. But
so Vinny made the point. And we can debate a little bit. I mean, this is right pre World War II overlap career era we're talking about. So with that in mind, I mean, 6 times first team All Pro is a pretty impressive accomplishment. I'm trying to find the list. I got this in front of me, and you go down all time, and there are guys obviously with more than 6. But when you look down the list and find out who's not in the Hall of Fame, there's a pretty small group of players who are currently eligible as a modern, or in this case, in senior, who have that many who are not in the Hall of Fame. And so, again, there's a little more depth there, and we've talked about some of the challenges, right, with these guys from the 30s and 40s. But 6-time first team All Pro is a significant accomplishment. I know we can debate the watered down quality of the play. I get all that. But as someone once told me, they are playing football and somebody's going to be first team All Pro, and he was 6 times. So it's something that you just can't gloss over. That's for sure.
I will say that during our process, Kirk, the one person who's jumped out at me once I got through the Hall of Famers, since we've done class 46, class 47, the first person I think when I was going through who's the Hall of Famer or person who's not in the Hall of Fame, I really need to start taking a good look at. Ox Emerson was the first name that jumped at me.
First name is actually Grover, but no one's going to call him after the Sesame Street character.
And I don't know if it matters. He was also a war hero on top of that. I mean, I don't know if that people care about that.
He was.
For some, right?
Yeah, but he was, even for the era, he was undersized, 5'11" and change, about 202 pounds, but super quick and incredibly powerful for his size. So people talked about like the sound it made when he made contact. Obviously, we're talking about a time when the game was played. What's the word I'm looking for?
Differently.
Viscerally. Guys would often have blood streaming down their faces. It was on a regular basis. Broken noses were very common. But he was a guy that was just known for busting people up, despite being one of the smaller players at his position. So incredibly powerful. And I think that when you go back and really look, and like people have noted, it's obviously, few and far between can you find film and things like that. But there are people who up through the 80s and 90s who were interviewed, who were Hall of Fame level players, when interviewed and talked about Ox Emerson, they all agreed he was one of the handful of the best players of his era, and some thought he was the best guard of his era. Some thought with some room to spare. So that's something that's worth considering also.
I also want to give another shout out to Corey. He did another really quality case for Ox Emerson. Again, you guys all got to follow Corey. He actually told me that Red Grange listed the most deserving, people that he thinks should be in the Hall of Fame. I think Red Grange actually said something about how like Ox Emerson, like out of his entire best players of all time, Ox Emerson's still the one that's not in the Hall of Fame. And we're talking about Red Grange here. The Galloping Ghost, one of the most famous players in just football history. We not only that, we also talk about his time as a defensive player. We always talk about his time as a guard, but as a linebacker.
Right.
The Detroit Lions, while he was their star linebacker, they actually allowed the fewest passing yards in the entire NFL in 1933 and 1937. And in 1934, The Lions due a league low 59 points and posted 7. That's right, 7 consecutive shutouts to start the season. So for the first 7 games, the Lions, anchored by Ox Emerson as their linebacker, didn't allow a single point. Like,
Wow.
yeah, like Emerson, especially when I look at those two-way players, like, you look at the names like, how Dilwig was, or Llewellyn, Wisterd, and
Dilweg.
I
I'm
mean, it's like amazing. Like I mean, this is like amazing to me because the Lions have been so bad like my entire life. It's not even funny. Like my
They've
mother
been
was
so bad all our entire lives, Ryan.
like I'm gonna tell you this. I'm gonna shut
Yeah,
up
I'm
because I know
50.
we
They've
got
been
moved.
bad my entire life.
Okay, so mother was
50.
born.
Tried to do
My
a
mother was
segue.
born March 14th, 1957. She was 9 months old when the Lions last won a championship. There are 2 people on my timeline that were starting kindergarten. Like my one of my friends, Reverend Melanie, she is 70 years old. She was starting kindergarten when the Lions last won a championship. One of my a friend of mine whose daughter is a bartender in my office on St. Charles, she was starting first grade, and she was starting first grade when they last won a championship. So I'm like, all this stuff about Ox Emerson is like, oh my God, I did not know this. Like, how did I not learn this in school?
yeah, and now you see why I was so happy that Buddy Parker was finally named as the finalist, while Patriots fans got angry.
Okay,
Yeah,
guys, we got to move on to another old school
moving
guy.
on.
Did you say Lavi Dilweg?
Yes,
Kurt?
I did, Jeff. Yes, I did. Do you want to take that, or should we have that to Chris, who's another Packer guy?
I already
I
gave
think,
him 2.
I think, I think it's anybody but Vinny at this point, just to troll Vinny. So if Chris wants to take Dilwig as the Packers guy, we could do that, and then
Yeah, I'm
Vinny will
fine.
just be sitting there checking
Oh,
every single
Vinny
thing.
will tell you he's not a team guy of any kind. That's why I like him.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not. My team is. I
Matt
guess
Ryan, we know.
Your
no.
team is
My,
not Ryan. All right,
Yeah.
let's go, Lavi. Let's keep it moving,
Chris, go.
guys.
Dilwig.
All right, so Lavi Dilweg again, another 1920s, 1930s Packer. Back before the era of stats, back for the era of video. But last year he was one of the semifinalists here for the Pro Football Senior Committee. This year he fell off the list, which is kind of disappointing. Another guy that he played both ways. He played he was an end on both offense and defense, which was not uncommon back then. 6 consecutive first team All Pros, championship member with the Packers back in the 20s and 30s. The one stat that I picked up from listening to Ken Crippen and Clark Judge on their podcast, Ken's podcast last couple weeks ago, was 27 interceptions as a defensive end.
Yep.
The 5, I think it was 4 or 5 ends that are in the Hall of Fame from that same era. You add up all their interceptions, it doesn't add up to 27. So he's got more by himself than the other players in the Hall of Fame had combined. Yeah, prolific at the time, prolific offensive player. As I said, he's an all-decade team from the 1920s. He just probably was the best end at the time for that era. And just again, when he ended his career, the Hall of Fame wasn't around for another 30 years. He just got lost to time. And his case has kind of been brought up here and there. Like I said, last year was on the list, was on the centennial list. It's just kind of been overlooked here, and it's really a shame because there is no gap in his resume. Everything that you would expect out of a player from that era, he did, and he did better than pretty much everybody else.
I think with Dilweg, it's really an interesting thing. There's a lot of parallels when we're looking at like people like Emerson and Schaffner, just Bond for that matter too. Just time forgot them for whatever reason. They went with everyone, and then just okay, here's your one guy. And it's like, poof. Am I wrong in that, guys? Or
No, I think it's something else too. I've talked
Okay.
about it with some of these like super senior guys, is it's that lack of stats. And that point about the 27 INTs, like when you look at that compared to like modern numbers and some of the other DBs and so forth that you hear, without the context, doesn't feel like a big deal. As little as they threw the ball back then, for an end to have 27 interceptions, and you talk about the next few guys on the list below him combined didn't have that number, like that's Don Hudson type of stuff in relation to the touchdown catch. But you could quantify the 99 career touchdown catches for Hudson. The 27 interceptions for Dealwig is something that voters can't just point to and be like, yeah, that makes sense to me. That's easy to understand. And I think it's the fact there's no real footage of him, or very, very little footage, I would imagine, exists of him. He's just, to your point, like once the first few years of the Hall of Fame process, I think Paul brought it up earlier, like once you got past 65 and 66, those guys from the 20s and 30s, they went into the garbage heap of history, so to speak, and there's never been a guy that's made it since.
Yeah, like not only that, Jeff, you're mentioning Hudson. He was Hudson before Don Hudson, but the reason as to why he got lost in shuffle is because Don Hudson was just that dominant of a player, and Laverne Dilwig, like I've said so much about Lavi Dilwig, like he is like my ultimate Giga Chad when it comes to like non pre NFL seniors. I just love the dude so much. Was 6 all decade teams, 8 all pros. He has stats and almost everyone from his era better than anyone from his era. I think another reason why he's also not in is kind of the same reason why Llewellyn and Isbell also are not in. So I think when it comes to those Packers teams, those Lambeau era Packers teams, and I think it's also a reason why the other members of the Hungry Five aren't in yet, is because in the same way that people question, the 70s Dolphins, the 70s Steelers, or the 70s Cowboys, this comes to the point to say, how many of these Packers could we add? And as a result, and the same reason why it took so long for Dave Robinson and Jerry Kramer, there was kind of a question. And now, even though Isbell, Llewellyn, and Dilwig were listed as, finalists in 2020, they sort of in a way cancel each other out a little bit. I mean, you had 2023, you had Llewellyn wasn't there, but Isbell and Dilwig were there in the 25, and then Isbell made it to the 12. Then the following year, Dilwig drops off, and Isbell, who was on the 12 last year, doesn't make it this year. So, like, I do think Isbell is the weakest of the three. I still think he's deserving, but I still think that I wouldn't have Isbell before Dilwig or Llewellyn personally, and
okay.
That's why.
Hey guys, just so you guys know, I have to drop off. I got a situation with my daughter here I got to help deal with. So, talk like I gave my votes.
Okay, Evan, thanks so much for being part of this. It's also sort of like a good way to sort of like segue to the next one. Again, it's not like I want to cut anyone off here. I want to open up to somebody who hasn't sort of opened before here, which I believe would be Savon or Ryan. Do either one of you want to sort of like talk about the greatness of Roger Craig? As an
I can do Roger.
I think I can definitely do Roger.
Right, both
Craig.
of you. Floor is yours, my friend.
Darn. All right. Well, I definitely would go and do Roger Craig. I think when we think of the 49ers, and when you think of the great offensive players in the history of the 49ers, you think of people like Terrell Owens. We know about Terrell Owens, Terrell Owens, Steve Young, this, that, and the other. But Roger Craig deserves his flowers. He deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And in my case, is that you look at the model consistency he was as a football player. This guy was an integral part of those great 49er teams. 3-time Super Bowl champion, offensive player of the year in 1988, 4-time Pro Bowler, all decades team. He was a first team All Pro and second team All Pro. He was a 4-time Pro Bowler, receptions leader. That being said, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and it's just based on his resume alone. And if you want to look at like the PFR, and we talked about the Hall of Fame, the PFR, and if you look at the similar players, and I'm just going to run down the similar players here according to PFR. if you look at his career, his first 3 years was compared to Marshall Faulk, Eric Dickerson, and LaDainian Thompson. First 4 years, Franco Harris, Marshall Faulk, Earl Campbell. Every year that he played in his career in general was compared to Eric Dickerson, Thurman Thomas, Leroy Kelly, and O.J. Simpson. 4 guys that are already in the Hall of Fame. 4 guys. And then I'm going to say this in closing and land my plane here. Twice he finished top 10 in touchdowns. And if you look at touchdown rushing and receiving touchdowns, he's in the top 100. However, in terms of rushing touchdown, he had 2 times where he finished in the rushing touchdown top 10. And of course, he didn't get to 10,000 yards. However, it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter. His body of work supersedes the fact that he didn't get 10,000 yards rushing and all these other things. I mean, his total yards was about 13,000 over 13,000 yards. And that's just combined rushing and receiving. So I think he makes a strong case because the 49ers don't win the Super Bowl without him those 3 years, without him being the anchor of that running back core.
I was putting in there in the chat a little bit about Craig. I think it's an interesting piece, is that in some ways he gets hurt by the point you called out about the lack of 10,000 career rushing yards. The TD numbers aren't the highest. But I think it's like part of the challenge maybe for the voters of how do you quantify that all around impact. When you think about him as a pass catcher, like this is a guy that led the league in receptions. What was it, in 85? He had a couple other seasons where he was like top 5 in a time in a system where it was favored, split his career between playing fullback in that system and then playing running back. But you look at him and you say, yeah, you could run Brian's great point there in the chat, like why carry for 4 yards when you can catch for 8? And when you think about those, he played on 3 of those championship 49ers teams. And we talk about those 49ers teams, like that was a dynasty of the 80s. They certainly don't feel overrepresented in camp, where we've talked about maybe Lombardi's Packers, the 70s Steelers. Like you look back at those 80s 49ers teams, they certainly don't feel overrepresented, and maybe some ways feel a little underrepresented with how much they dominated the league for that time.
Yeah, I think also too, because Ryan, you're a Saints fan like me, right? All right, so like we've got a running back in Alvin Kamara who's never had a 1,000 yard rushing season. We don't care.
We don't. I mean, he's right now tied with Marquise Colston for the most touchdowns, combined total touchdowns in Saints history, and he's done that in 6 years. And when you look at Roger Craig, you see a lot of Roger Craig in Alvin Kamara because he's never had a 1,000 yard rushing season. He's been so focused in being a pass catcher and a great runner. I mean, seeing him play, the great tragedy now is that we should have saw him in Super Bowl in Super Bowl 53 was supposed to be when we saw that brilliance on a larger stage, and we didn't see that because of that.
Have our own podcast on that one, my friend. But yeah, so Roger Craig, I do apologize. I just want to move that along because we're hitting we're close to the 2 hour mark, and I didn't want to hit 2 hours, but it looks like we are. Jeff, I'm going to bring it to you because you've asked to open up with Maxie Bond, the late great Maxie Bond, who we dedicated the show to. So
yeah, I'm going to take a little different spin on this because as I think about like the way we're doing this, we've got some different names on the list, right? And when I have heard Jack Silverstein call this out before, is like who should be the person that we start with in the process, or who should the voters start with the process and determine whether they're worthy or not. And it's ironic we're talking about him last, because I think Maxie Bond should actually go first. When you look at the peak of his career from 1960, when he was a rookie and UPI Rookie of the Year runner-up on that championship Eagles team, like he came in, had a massive impact from day one. From 60 to 69, I think 1962 was the only year that he wasn't selected as a Pro Bowler. And this is at a time where his peers, his contemporaries, not the media I'm talking about, but the players and coaches, they voted for the Pro Bowl. Then I take that and say 9 times in 10 seasons. Like, how the hell is this guy not in the Hall of Fame? Like you used to maybe say about Chris Hamburger from that era. Now you talk about the media. How did the media view him? Played in Philly, played with the Rams, 1-time first team All Pro, 5 times second team All Pro, AP. Like, so the media also thought that this guy was great. So there's almost like unanimity in terms of how great this guy was. And for some reason, he's not in it. When you look at this list, and we're talking about uniqueness, there's some positional uniqueness here. If we talk about linebacker, if we talk about who else on this list was selected by the peers 9 times for a postseason honor in terms of the Pro Bowl, Maxie Baughan is the only one. When you look at the 1960s All-Decade team, and we've talked before as a group of like some of the farcical choices, I look at Larry Morris was a first-team All-Decade guy.
He didn't have a single All-Pro or Pro Bowl.
Yes. So as I was saying,
yep.
Larry Morris, as a Bears fan, I say Larry Morris had absolutely no business on that list because arguably he was the 3rd best linebacker in that early 60s group.
Fortunato is more deserving.
Yeah, Fortunato's more deserving. He's not even ever going to get any conversation. And my point is that I look at Maxie Baughan. This guy was a 9-time Pro Bowler, and he can't make the All-Decade team. That's crazy to me. And let me finish.
One thing too, I saw the Bill, if you don't mind, because like when we sort of like looked at his passing, like for you, that's your number 2 guy behind Gradishar, is it not?
Yeah, I've never understood why Maxie Baughan couldn't get more love. And as Brian is putting there, I was just great minds think alike. He could do everything at a super high level. I mean, he had a great mind for the game. He was a terrific athlete. I think he was a 3-sport athlete at Georgia Tech, if memory serves me correctly, and was a terrific coach. I mean, so he had the mind. He could run like a scalded dog. He had good hands. He could, he could intercept the ball. He was good against the run. He was good in coverage. He was a great blitzer. Like, there was no weakness. There was nothing he couldn't do at a super high level. And we talked about Gradishar. I mean, Gradishar obviously was maybe one of the greatest solo tacklers. Like, his ability to tackle in space is maybe unequaled. I don't know if there's been a better open field tackler in the history of the game than Randy Gradishar, but Baughan wasn't far off. He was terrific in the open field, and once again, we're talking about still a run down. He was great in coverage. It's a run dominated game, and he had enough strength, enough power to shed offensive linemen and fill against big, strong backs, 225, 230-pound backs. He would come in, stack and shed against the guard, and boom, lay the wood. There wasn't anything he couldn't do at the highest of levels. And it is a mystery to me that he's even in the seniors pool at all, quite frankly. But here we are.
Yeah. I think part of that is the fact that he split his career between the Eagles and Rams, right? And he's not really closely associated with any one fan base, with any one organization. I do think, like, we look at the history here, there's a pretty good precedent of these senior guys are helped by being a part of majority one team, one organization that they could be identified with. Bill, I'll call out, like, some of his INT numbers are a little bit lower than maybe some like linebackers that came afterwards. But when you talk about his all-around skills, like, he was really at the top of the heap in his time. Yeah, I think similar to like a Chuck Howley, right? I had to get that in there for Paul because I think there's 2 examples of linebackers that absolutely belonged to the 1960s All-Decade team that didn't make it. And that's really hurt him because the linebacker position I've seen historically, it seems like if you're not one of those slam dunk first ballot guys, you really damn struggle. Hence why we had to start off talking about Randy Gradishar if we put him in our hypothetical, and he's not even in the real deal. Howley finally just got in his mid-80s. And Maxie Baughan, unfortunately, didn't get that chance. And I just come back to, like, close this out before we do anything else, is say, like, we should think about Maxie Baughan first. He's got the most unique traits and elements here and resume of any of the other guys that we've talked about. Many worthy guys here, but he's the one that stands out, and that's the one we should pick first. Yes or no?
Okay. So I think we sort of oh, sorry, go ahead, Vin.
I was going to say real quick. Oh, go ahead, Vinny.
Pierce?
Yeah.
Were you going to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, Pierce, go ahead.
Well,
sorry.
So his Pro Bowls got mentioned a lot, and this isn't to take away from his accolades because he has plenty. But for some quick putting in perspective for his Pro Bowls, in the modern NFL, we have 32 teams, 16 in the conference, and 5 linebackers go to the Pro Bowl. So it's 5 to 16. Back when Maxey played, there was 14 teams in the NFL, 7 in the conference, and 4 went. So it was twice as easy to be for the majority of his Pro Bowls than it is for modern. But this isn't a slight against him. That's just he still earned them, but they weren't terribly difficult.
It's worth discussing for sure.
No one else had
what I'd
more
like
that
to
decade,
do-
though.
So what I'd like to do now is, can one person sort of like agree that they're going to collect the votes? All right, Vin, it's you.
I can collect the votes.
Oh, Ryan, why don't you do it?
Okay, Ryan. So you do it. All right. So everyone send your votes to Ryan. Ryan, I'm going to send you also Evans because Evan sent me his. And while we're doing that, I'm going to plug all the other things in the Bucknerverse because
We are voting for 3, correct? Just to be very clear.
Yeah. How many?
Everyone's voting for 3. We're voting for 3, and when it's all, and when Ryan, you've got it all, you're going to tell us who the 3 people that Not in Hall of Fame is presenting. Well, no, Ryan, we're just going to send it to you on a direct.
Wait, should we kind of cut it down to 6 because the actual Hall of Fame cuts it from like 12 to 6?
No, we're presenting our 3 people, and that's that.
Okay.
I am putting together a spreadsheet so I can keep up with all the votes.
Yeah.
So let me get this straight, Kirk. We're sending it in a direct message to Ryan and directly.
Yeah,
Yes,
we're sending it
on
to
Zoom.
Ryan
Okay,
directly.
thank you very much.
Ryan, you've got that, right?
Yes, I do have that. So what we're voting.
So I'm going to send you 2 for me because I was going back and forth with Evan. So Evan's told me his 3, and because his 3 are different than my 3.
Okay.
And yeah, so actually I'll give you his 3 now. And so everyone will do that, and then you'll just calculate them all, and then you'll tell us the 3.
All right, so we have. All right, so I am about to type in.
Well, just collect them all, and then tell us after. We're sort of
Okay. I am seeing the love here. I am seeing the love. Give me 1 second. I gotta.
I just sent you the love.
I really sent you the love to you and especially to Brian.
And then
No, Vinny, you can't vote
everybody's
for Matt
sending
Ryan.
everybody's sending Ryan their man love, and we are not ashamed of doing so.
Listen,
not what I thought we were doing here, but that's okay.
I brought his jersey with me, by
Glasses,
the
Kirk.
way.
I'm not putting my glass.
There you go again, Schlegs. There you go again.
While I'm here, you want to do some plugging, Kirk?
I'm going to plug. I'm going to do some serious plugging because that's what I do, and I can't do it without you.
What's this other boots?
Kirk, I understand you're getting old, but could you stop being as openly horny?
Bro.
Because I'm old, I'm not that horny.
Come on, we've got some eyes on us.
Oh, the kids. For the kids.
Well, what am I?
But yeah, okay. To Vinny's point, I'm going to plug some of the other things that I do here in the Bucknerverse. In the Bucknerverse, Vinny's a big part of that. He does a show called Vinny Makes the Hall of Fame Case. It's always interesting, and if you haven't watched some of Vinny's shows, you really should. One of my favorite ones that he did was when he actually made a Hall of Fame case for former President Theodore Roosevelt. And if you're thinking that makes no sense, holy shit, yes, it does. The last one we did was for Al Wistert, and we're going to be recording another one next week for Seymour Siloff. In hockey, we did one for Don Cherry that's already up.
Grapes.
And yeah, I mean, like Vinny does a great job. He puts everything together in like a 20-minute thing, and I'm really proud of him. And it's like I'm your dad, man. But I mean,
well, you're old enough to be my dad.
I really am. Which is okay.
All right, guys. I'm almost done with tallying the votes, so I will have the votes momentarily.
Okay. Well, there's other shows that I do here in the Bucknerverse. Paul Lawrence and I do a show where we look at the retro football review, where we look at past Super Bowls and past major football games. We recorded a bunch already this summer. They're not up yet, but they're going to be because we have to add a bunch of things. Many of the people here who are watching this, Ron, looking at you, buddy, are going to be guests on this, where we're looking at just different perspectives on this from a modern point of view. It's a lot of fun and we enjoy it, especially when I get to the halftime shows, eh Paul?
Wardrobe malfunction.
There you go. There's other shows I do. One, he wasn't able to join us here tonight. Glenn Pulowski. It's our classic sports review, where Glenn and I, well, God, we really don't even look at classic sports anymore. We're looking at crap that are masqueraded sports. Soon to come up here is when we looked at the roller game show. Who here knows what that is?
I've heard of it by the name, but not much outside of that.
All right, so nobody. Well, it's basically stupid and it's crap, and we looked at it and laughed at it. It was a hell of a lot of fun, and we're great at it. One thing also too that I want to bring up, and some of you are part of that, some of you are not, and I hope you all will be. It's the United States Athletic Hall of Fame. Amazingly, nobody came up with this, so Evan and I did, and we've trademarked that. So it's the United States Athletic Hall of Fame, www.notinhalloffame.com/USA. Bill's going to help us out next week, and I'm really excited about that because you and Ken Crippen are going to sort of do a tete-a-tete, as we say here in Canada, in French, tete-a-tete, where I'm just going to throw out some people who were nominated for that and just see what you do.
Fair enough.
Also, Kirk, I want to give a shout out to Jack Silverstein and Brian Fry because they most recently appeared on Talk of Fame's website, where both of them gave their top 3 seniors that are in the list of the semifinalists they'd like to see be the finalists this year. So congratulations to both of you guys. I hope you're invited on more and more often, and hopefully more of us could be on there soon.
A great job, guys. And
I'm
thank you
hoping
for the
all of you-
Gratishar support.
Well, Ron is going to be a guest on one of the shows, and has been on another show, the one I do with Glenn. I want all of you to be a guest on certain things. I really enjoyed. We got everything.
We got everything right now. So far, the votes are in.
All right, the votes are in. All right, let's do this.
The votes are in.
What do we got?
For the most part, Sharp got 7 votes. Dilwig got 4 votes. Gratishar got 3 votes.
No
one should be voting for
Wizard Lewis got 3 votes. Lewis Wright got 3 votes. I see 3 for Lewis Wright. Llewellyn got 1 vote. Laverne Dilwig got 4 votes. Roger Craig I believe he got 2 votes. Craig got 2 votes. And
so
basically
who had the top 3?
So basically in the top 3 is Sterling Sharp. Sterling Sharp. And there is a tie for the 3rd spot with Gratishar and Lewis.
Okay, guys.
We should not be voting for Gratishar.
I did not vote for Gratishar.
Let's do this all over again.
I'm telling you.
Nobody should have been voting for Gratishar.
I did not.
Voted for Gratishar.
Well, I haven't even voted yet, so I'm gonna have to.
No, but whoever voted, 3 people voted for Gratishar should not have.
Okay, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
Crap.
So let's do this. Let's post the 12 names that we should be voting on in the
13.
chat, so everybody get 13. Excuse me, the 13 names that everybody should be
All right,
voting off of, and then
God, all of you.
All right, so what are the 13 names that we're going to be voting on? So I'm on this time. I'm on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, because and to be fair, Ryan was late coming here, so
no. So we are getting the names together.
We're getting the names together. This is why we're transparent, because I'm sure David Baker had some issues too.
So transparent, so very transparent.
Okay, Vinny's putting it all through. Okay, let Vinny put it all through. Then you just take it from there.
Or are we sending it to Ryan? Or
Yeah, we're still sending it to
Sending
Ryan.
it to Ryan.
Vinny, you can only vote for 3.
I know. I'm aware. I'm aware. I know.
And Matt Ryan's not a seniors candidate yet.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
aware.
yeah.
I understand that there's no
Look at his
Heffelfinger or John Brawley here. Don't worry.
Kirk,
Don't worry, guys.
Kirk, if
They
we're
were-
really
they were
looking
always-
for seniors, though, if we're looking for seniors, we can't vote Tom Brady.
To be fair though, like when I was doing the whole process, a lot of you just sort of like put in votes, even though I said we're not doing Randy Gradishar. 3 of you did put Randy Gradishar.
I
Tells you
came
how much
late,
people
so
want
that's
him.
my fault. That's my fault. I came late, so I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
I didn't see that. That was not bad.
Don't worry. That should tell you, Ron, how much people want Randy Gradishar. Even when he's not on the list, they still.
I
they
want
love
him
him.
anyway.
He needs to be in, though.
Look up his vote again.
But Randy needs to be in. I don't understand what's the hesitancy to put him in general.
It's
There's probably a lot to that, more than we
We'll
have time.
find out on Tuesday. I mean, on Wednesday morning. But
Man.
there's
We
a
got the
lot of
names.
factors.
We've got the name, Craig, Paul, you put all the names there. So everybody should be sending their 3 votes that are not Randy Gradishar. Randy Gradishar is great. He belongs in the class of 2024. He belonged many years ago, but is not one of the 3 that we're voting for here.
And Jeff, also to add, Ken Anderson is not one of the candidates because we voted him in along with Randy Gradishar and Chuck Hawley last year.
Apparently, we all figured that one out.
We were just so smitten with Ron's presentation that we said the few people said no, we're voting for him anyway.
Right, I'm sending you Evan's vote because he has that, and then mine.
All
Well,
right,
the thing
so
too is
I'm right now. I'm putting the spreadsheet together. I saw a run.
Just give us the top 3. When you got it all,
I would
just the
yeah,
top
I
3.
will get. All right, I will get all of those votes, and I am going to get that taken care of. So
all good.
I will be back with the votes.
So if
Top
folks
3.
are interested, we got a minute or 2 here, Kurt. So
Yeah, well, let's
again,
promote our show. We haven't done
well,
that
there's
yet.
that too. But just to refresh everybody's memory. So what's going to happen in the next couple of days, just so people kind of know how this plays out. So tomorrow, the 12 voters will meet on a Zoom call. I suspect it will take all day or a long part of it. They're going to be assisted this year by his football historian John Turney will be a non-voting consultant. This is something that has been part of the process for a while. Let's not get into the weeds too much on this. However, there's been issues in the past, or at least concerns of having, for example, former players, coaches, or Hall of Famers serving as non-voting consultants and having a little bit of favoritism or bias towards, which is understandable. It's human nature. Players and coaches that they're more familiar with. So that's been a little bit of shift. One that the voters asked to, and it's great, I think, to have somebody who's a little more outside the process and not voting, and a guy like John Turney who has a good understanding of the history and background of a lot of these guys, including the super seasons. Super seniors. So they start with 12. All 12 are presented. Each voter will present a case. I think they have like 4 or 5 minutes. They will discuss each case in order as they're presented. They will then vote down first cut to 6, unless there's any ties. And then from there, the next vote will be from 6 down to the 3. My daughter's dog is about pushing his way through the door. So that's kind of the process that's going to happen. Now, like last year, it's going to be a lengthy day for the voters. And so it's very possible, like last year, the hall won't make the announcement until Wednesday. So they have some time to get quotes, do interviews, put together the press release. So very likely, but we will get the news. And those, of course, will be the 3 senior finalists that will go to the full selection committee when they meet in early January. This year, I understand they're trying to do a in-person meeting, either in Atlanta or Chicago, and move away from the Zoom meetings But again, all three of those senior finalists will have to go in front of the entire board of 50. They are presented one at a time individually and voted on individually and need 80% of the 50 or whoever ends up attending that meeting in January to be elected. So they do not go against one another. They don't go against the moderns. They stand on their own merits and are voted individually. So that's just so folks know how things are play out. But tomorrow's a big day for that big step. And yes, many of us have some favorites that we're hoping come out of all that for tomorrow. So there's kind of your role for you.
Yeah,
There you go.
give the crap I give John Turney aside, and by the way, yes, I am in fact blocked by him on Twitter. Yes, I got it
Well,
mentioned.
Elon says you can't be blocked anymore. So this is going to be a great week for you, buddy.
Yeah, I mean,
unblocked.
the crap that him and I kind of like exchange to their side. He does know his stuff, and I am happy that he is getting his voice in there because I kind of feel like for a while he has been pining for that for a bit. So I could definitely see him as a voter one day. He definitely does have an insight. He does watch a lot of old film. I do wish he was a bit more, of a push when it comes to those, pre-World War II and of course pre-NFL. But it is what it is. He follows the film, and
It's more, Vinny, it's more than the film. He does his homework. He does so much effort to pull stats and make apples to apples. And I think sometimes he's very focused on what he knows. And when people kind of are a little off the beaten path to kind of like a dead end, he's not shy to tell you, hey, this ain't going to work because we've tried it before. And there's a lot of ideas that have been out there that have been done before. Oh, let's get like all the gold jackets voting. Well, maybe not, but he knows the reasons. And I have a lot of respect for him, and he's definitely going to make sure that there's going to be an informed vote. And with all 12 of them getting a presentation, that's huge. In the past, it might have been one or two guys among the 5 who are voting, and it's so much more of a level playing field for especially even those older players, who are deceased or long retired. I'm not talking Randy even, that they all get their day, even their 5 minutes of what they're all about. It wasn't happening that consistently or that transparently. And if Jim Porter, if you're out there, thank you for changing the process, working with the board, and trying to get it right. It's a work in progress. And thank you, selectors, too, seniors and contributors, coaches. Thank you for all that you guys do. It's not an easy job, and you get people who are armchair keyboard warriors, right?
Gratishar or we riot, and I'm serious. Like if Gratishar is not one of the 3 in 2024, no, at that point it's pretty indefensible. I will say what Ron doesn't want to say. No, there's no defending at this point. Gratishar needs to be one of the 3 this time.
I've done a lot of communicating and also some facts, like that Super Bowl fact. And the Broncos chief communications officer tonight just tweeted the Clark Judge kind of study, in terms of the historians and a couple of you guys on here, as part of the Broncos' main case for Randy. And he quote tweeted it with that Super Bowl stat. So it's just a matter of getting that in front of the selectors. Hopefully,
one thing
back.
before.
What do we got
yes,
here?
I'm back. So basically, it's pretty much the 3 that we selected. And gentlemen, y'all did well. We are selecting Sterling Sharp, Maxie Boggin, and looks like here, what we got here? Oh, nice. I had to tabulate all these folks in here. I had to tabulate all this stuff. We got Sterling Sharp, Roger Craig, and Maxie Boggin.
Vaughn.
All right, look at that, guys.
What are the vote totals?
Vote totals, it was very close. It was very close. It was like 7. It was like a lot of money was going towards Sterling Sharp. A lot of money was going towards Sterling Sharp and Maxie Vaughn. So it's like
what are the actual totals?
The actual
Do you have
totals?
the actual totals? Yeah.
I have the actual totals were basically almost along the same lines here, almost along the same lines. 8 for Sharp, 7 for Sharp. Vaughn got 5. Roger Craig got 3, which was shocking to me.
That was enough for third?
Yeah. Dillwig got 2.
Oh. Which means he only voted twice.
And Lewis, let me see here. Lewis got 3. Lewis got 3 as well. Lewis got 3. Craig got 2. I am not making this up. Like, look, I live
Did
in
you have
Louisiana.
Dilwig at 3 before? Like, what happened in the second time?
Look, I live in Louisiana. We excel in corruption. I am
Is math different in Louisiana?
Oh no! Oh no!
All right, so hold on. So do we need to break? Do we need to break a tie between Craig and
it sounds like we have a tie somewhere.
Yeah, like what are the actual vote totals for each of the 13 candidates? Let's start there.
Yeah, is it a way, Ryan, that you could show us your laptop to see like your Excel sheets? That way you can see it, sort of like how Evan would do it.
I say I have no idea how to share this. How to share?
No, that's okay. I mean, so like who's tied for three? Okay, so we have Sharp way higher than everyone else, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So Sharp's in.
So who was second in our whole list?
He said Maxi Bond, and he said Maxi Bond had 5.
So Maxi Bond had 5. All right, so we had a pair of 3s. Who else had? Do we have more than one person at 3?
Said Roger, Craig, and Albert Lewis. Did anybody else have 3 votes?
Right.
I heard him say Laverne Dilwig got 3 also.
Yeah, Dilwig got 3 as well.
So all right, so Dilwig's got 3. Roger Craig's got 3. Does anyone else have 3? And then we're gonna do a tiebreaker.
Break the tie, yeah.
Did no one else vote for Lewis, right? I know Brian and I did.
Yeah, the votes for Lewis Wright. I know Bill. I got that down here. So it was like 2 votes for Lewis Wright, Llewellyn. I said,
but we have 2 people at 3, right?
Yeah, and just in case any of you are wondering, with me being a Broncos person, I actually went Wistert, Bond, and Kuchenberg.
Right.
Okay.
So Wistert has to have at least 2 votes because I also voted for Al Wistert.
I voted for Dilwig, Bond, and Wistert.
So Wistert has to have 3 also then.
Okay, so can everybody just paste their votes in the chat, just so everybody can see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hey, Jeff.
All right, I gave you one job.
Hey, Jeff.
Don't blame. Look, like I say, I'm trying to I'm trying to do the best I can. Like I never held down the voting on this, so this is like new territory for me. So I'm
my apologies. I just wanted somebody else to do it so I could promote my other shows.
All right,
That's
listen, Vince, you know anything about
Okay.
elections?
What?
Go on.
You know anything about elections? You know anything about keeping votes?
In your country, no, I don't.
Well, I know.
Sorry.
I mean,
now he gets to flex how Canadian he is.
All right. Well, we gotta find somebody.
Surprised
like,
your head is not unhinged from its jaw.
All right, Vic, okay.
I just wanted to add something too. And Jeff, this is kind of specific. We were talking about, Kuchenberg last year with the seniors voters with the 12 voting. You see how like on 5th and 6th, you're getting like 3 votes or maybe 4 votes or 2 votes or whatever. I have a feeling in the room they probably had like the first 2 or 3 guys pretty strong on the votes.
Yeah.
So when they got to 6, that was my theory, was maybe Kuchenberg got like 3 and a bunch of other guys got 2. Where if they
all right, so let's put it all on the thing, and somebody put it all together.
Interesting dynamic.
Okay, I'm gonna
Kirk, do we need help in putting this together?
Yeah.
I'll just do it with the
Guess
old
so.
good old post-it note because the
No,
old
no.
good. tried
Tell you
yeah.
what, Kirk, if you want, why don't I take a shot at this? Why don't I put the names in an Excel spreadsheet and go from there?
All right.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, I'm just gonna put it all here in the.
Please, can you just please send me the names of all the guys, like one by one? Like, can you guys just spell it out one by one so I
Just
can
send
write
it
it
to
down?
you.
They're in the
Yeah,
they're in
I'll
the chat. Everybody's posting their votes in the chat. It looks like.
All right,
Yeah.
do you want it in the group chat or do you want it to you, buddy?
Send me the list of every single of the 13 players, and then I can go from the group chat from there.
And I'm sorry, whose voice was that?
That's Robin.
Oh,
That's Jeff fan number 1, Bill. In case you didn't.
Yeah, that's the I'm a Jeff's disciple, so to speak.
No, here's the great thing. I guarantee you that that David Baker had issues too. He just didn't post it. We don't care.
And Bill, I gotta appreciate the fact that you went full government name for all
God,
three.
yes, to avoid
just to show off.
Bill Carroll, the goat.
Can someone send Sabrin the whole list?
So that's
damn it.
Well, I could say this: Bond so far has been on every single one.
Yeah, Bond is definitely up there.
Not true because Pierce threw a wrench in the whole thing by having Wright, Lewis, and Delweg.
Okay, let's just everyone send everything to Sabrin. We'll go from there.
Yeah, just please
Pierce,
just send it.
Pierce, you're a good boy for choosing Laverne Dillig. Now you can have your treat in the corner or something. Watching everyone.
Greenwood, Roger, Craig. Okay, let's see. Bond, have Lewis, have Schaffner. What's Schaffner's first name?
Del. Like Delbert. Think of Dilbert.
Del Schaffner. Okay.
Exactly.
I sent you Evan's vote and I'm sending you mine.
Okay. Hold on. Lester Hayes, Dilweg.
Me. I gotta.
Emerson. Okay, Corey. Great Bond. Yes. Great Bond. Shuffle. Oh, who's right, by the way, if I may?
Lewis Wright.
Lewis
Right. Yep, I got it. Okay, so before we go any further, I'm gonna read off the list of the 13 names. Just tell me if I at least have them down. Sterling Sharp, Maxie Bond, Albert Lewis, Alva Wistard, Bob Kuchenberg, Vern Llewellyn, Elsie Greenwood, Roger Craig, Del Schaffner, Lester Hayes, Emerson, Dilweg, and Lewis Wright.
Yep.
I think that's all of them, I think.
Okay.
Right?
So, all right. Emerson, Sharp.
Has everybody voted?
I'm so far. Kirk, I got Evan's vote.
And mine.
Okay, yours just came in. I'm just going through it one by one. So
Okay.
Brian, yours is next. I'm adding that right now. And okay. Next up, Kirk. Great. Bill Carroll here, okay.
Here's a curious, Chris. Ted isn't voting, so it'll be 12. So that'll be 36 votes. Yeah, it'll be 36.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 people have voted so far in terms of sending it to me. Is anyone else still sending it?
Oh, I gotta send to you personally.
Yeah, everybody, please send them directly to me.
Okay, I will do that. I will do that, Mr. SG.
Okay, because I've got 4 of them, and I have counted them correctly in here. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Very good.
Yep, 12 votes.
Mine's coming. I'm sorry, I had it in the group chat.
All right,
Just give me a sec.
Vincent, gotcha.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
so while you're counting votes, I'm going to promote some other shit that I do. Because that's what I do. That's what I do. Paul Lawrence and I, we also run the Retro Football Review, where we have been looking at great classic football games. All of you are going to be part of that in some capacity, where we've just recorded Super Bowls. Oh, God, 8, 9, 10, 11, I don't know.
That's what we come to you for, Kirk. Is
nodding your head doesn't help me.
Yeah, so we're rolling through the mid to 70s at this point. So we've already posted a few of them, but we've been working on a whole bunch. So we just finished Super Bowl 7, the undefeated Dolphins undefeated season. 9, Pittsburgh's first Super Bowl win. 10, the classic Cowboys Steelers Super Bowl. 11, the Raiders first Super Bowl win against the Vikings. And Ron's going to be
hoping to have a special guest.
Yes, and for the next one, Ron is going to join us because we're doing Super Bowl 12, which I won't reveal my little. You have to watch it to find out my insights on that particular game. And then we're going to continue rolling. And I think as we move along here, we've talked about we did the Ice Bowl earlier, but we're going to start mixing in some games that were historical playoff games that weren't Super Bowls. I can think of a few in the 80s. And so it's just kind of been a fun thing, and we go through the play-by-play, and we talk about the players and Hall of Fame, and we talk a little bit about the evolution of the game, how things are changing, officiating, the offensive styles, defensive styles, and a highlight for some folks, maybe not many, but fun, is our post-hoc analysis of the halftime shows. That's turning out to be an unexpected bonus that Kirk just gets so. A couple of times I laughed through the whole thing. It was so hilarious, but it's a lot of fun. And yeah, if you have favorite games that are coming up, we're going to roll in the 80s here eventually later this fall. So keep this in mind if you're interested in jumping in. And it'd be great to have people who love that game and that team.
To that point, that's why we wanted Ron for that Super Bowl 12. Bill, you're already volunteering for a bunch of shit.
Kirk and Paul.
Guys, I only have 30 votes. If I'm not mistaken, we need 36, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm putting in my votes right now. That will make it 33, but I'm missing one person.
If you're looking for Theodore, he's my webmaster. He's not going to vote.
That would mean 33 then.
Yep.
Okay, 1 second.
And I can vote for Thomas if you want, but I know Lewis Wright 1, 2, and 3. And Gratishar.
Who are Tom's choices out of these 3? Did you ask him, Ron?
No, I didn't. But being that he presented Lewis Wright, I was just making a wild guess.
Yeah, I assume he would have Wright as one of them. That's for sure. Also, I should say this too. I don't know if you see behind me. Got a photo of myself right here. That's me. That's Jim Porter right here. I told him that everything I love from
compliments to the photographer.
Oh yeah.
Wait. Hold on. Evan, hold on. Evan did not send his
No,
Kirk did. Yeah, I got it. That was the first one. Evan already counted. So right now I have a total of 33 votes.
Yeah.
And that's
all right.
the correct
We're
number,
rolling.
correct?
We're rolling with that then at this point.
Okay.
All right.
So that's it. And
Kirk
I've got
may
the
have sent
results.
you 2 sets of votes. I think one of those sets was Evans, right?
Yes, Bill, he did.
Okay.
All right. We got good news, fellas. We've got a clear cut for the top 3.
Right.
All right, man.
So the first name to be inducted into this Hall of Fame is Maxie Bond with 7 votes.
Yay.
The second name is from Jeff's favorite team, the Green Bay Packers, wide receiver Sterling Sharp with 6 votes.
Yay.
Excellent.
And the third and final spot goes to, with 5 votes, Albert Wistert.
Al Worcester. Okay.
Al Worcester. Yeah. I thought you were going to say Randy Gratishar there for a second.
No, And
That was gonna be Lewis
the next closest vote was Dillweg with 4 votes.
Oh shucks, it's okay. I'm happy that Worcester made it in our ballot.
And then we have Dillweg had 4 votes, and then we had a tie. Albert Lewis and Roger Craig each had 3 votes.
Right.
Bob Kuchenberg and Emerson with 2 votes, and Lewis Wright is the only player that has 1 vote. Llewellyn, Greenwood, Schaffner, and the King of Stickham, Lester Hayes, have 0 votes.
Got it.
Okay. All right, guys. Let's call this a day.
Let's.
All right.
May I ask a favor of you, Kirk?
No, but go ahead.
No, I want to write an article about our process. I mean, I'll clean it up, obviously, as to protect us.
Yeah, go do it. Whatever you
Jack
want. It's all
does
good.
too.
But if you could send me a little bit about how the process works, the proceedings, and then people's actual names, unless they would like to be anonymous, and then let me know that, and I'll just say,
absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
Keep my name available.
Yes, well, I know your name is available.
Yeah, Bill, my last name is Gradishar. It's Grad. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, Bill. Send me a message, and I'll help you out any way I can, for sure.
Thank you, sir.
And Bill, if there's anything you want from me, I can tell you, it's been a journey. If there's success on Wednesday, I can really give you some.
I have a feeling there'll be success on. I have a very strong feeling that you're going to be.
I heard when I met him on
success on Wednesday. Paul and I have a show on Friday.
Oh,
perfect.
Ron's going to have to find a new gimmick. Ron, if Gradishar does get the call, what's the gimmick going to be? Is it going to be Lewis Wright? Or is it going to be
No, you want to hear something funny? There was a thing on Mile High Report, which is the old Bleacher Report site for the Broncos.
Yeah.
And I think it's Vox now or something like that. And it was talking about my journey and Randy and, please be nice to the selectors. Don't send nasty tweets. Focus on the positives kind of thing. And I got some people saying, well, once you get done with Randy, then you need to get here this guy and that guy, like it's just like a magic button. And I'm like, it's a process and they have to be worthy of the Hall of Fame.
Right.
I mean, it was like Mecklenburg. Okay, that's someone with a lot of Pro Bowls and All Pros. But then someone wanted Rod Smith, who I love Rod Smith.
I love Rod Smith.
But compared to the other wide receivers out there, it's a really tough hill to climb.
Oh, man. I'm going to have to think about the wide receiver crisis the Hall of Fame's having, but that's
exactly.
And then they put Otis Taylor in the final 12 or the semifinals for the seniors, and then Art Powell out of nowhere. That's the one that's fascinating.
Glad Art Powell was mentioned.
Otis Taylor, you mean the Chiefs wide receiver Otis Taylor, who had that big touchdown against the Vikings?
So since we're talking about this, should we just sort of throw out who we think they're going to actually pick?
I think Gradishar is a definite. I think Sharp is probably going to be a definite too. And there's a part of me that just feels like, because it just feels like it's destined to be that way because of just media stuff, I feel like McMichael will just take it. But personally,
Maxie Bond.
But I would rather have Maxie Bond or Al Worcester, honestly.
I'm thinking more along the lines that you are, Vince. I'm thinking it's going to be Randy Gradishar, the much calmer Sharp, and Sterling. And then I think Maxie Bond's going to take that last spot. Yeah, I would not be surprised if Worcester took it, though.
Worcester or Bond feel.
I would not be surprised if Worcester took it.
Well, the person who's running this, my webmaster, is probably wanting to go to bed. So let's wrap this all up, and then we can all shoot the shit as only the Bucknerverse can. So I wish you all, thank all of you for coming here. Tolerating my nonsense, because God knows that I expected my wife to do it. Why you're all doing this is pretty awesome. So this is kind of great. So thank you all. We're gonna call this a day. And Pro Football Hall of Fame fans, man, this is our time. This is our time, and
it's our time.
We had a great time doing this. We're gonna do this again. Where the Bucknerverse may eventually go, I don't know. The fact that all of them are saying that this is a Bucknerverse is pretty amazing, considering anyway, I'll leave it at that. All right, guys, Thank you all.
Peace.